very first video to see a young, apparently 16-year-old looking comic crack back on this day 10 years ago. So cheers, everybody. Hold on a second. Let me get myself my sake sorted here. We'll just do this. We'll probably do this a number of times throughout. But if you have something other than a big bowl of ice cream, cheers. So 10 years ago this afternoon at, I think, like around 1:30 in the afternoon, my time, I kind of sat and I think it was the third time from what I remember from watching a little piece of that video. Hello, everybody. Hello, Damien. Hello, Comic Board. Hello, Loading the Cannon. Thank you very much, Colin. Thank you very much. I sat in front of the camera for the first time and shot a few videos. If you go back and listen to that video, you can hear the camera focusing as it kind of keeps trying to find focus. Like I'm guessing a number of us at that time, I was using a camera. So, you know, nothing like a prosumer, just a cheap over-the-counter Fuji, I think is what it was. And trying my best to figure this whole system out. So I thought tonight we'd kind of talk a little bit about starting and kind of how things have changed, and then we'll just jump into the weekly wrap-up. I'll talk about some books that we didn't talk about this afternoon when Rasa and I hung out. Hopefully the audio is okay. I have kind of my old school setup with my webcam and a microphone. Yeah, that's a good one there, Comic Board. I'll get to all that stuff for sure. Yeah, that camera sound, Damien, was quite a thing. So let's just kind of go back to, so this was September 4th, 10 years ago, 2012. Before that, I have a post. Let me see if I can find it. Well, I know I can find it because I took a screenshot of it. Damien, you'll like this one as well, too. So going all the way back to August 19th, 2012, I posted a photo on my Instagram of these two fine-looking fellows, Sleepy Reader and Mr. Ghost Critic. And I kind of tagged a few of my friends in town that had that are interested in comics. So August 19th, 2012, I discovered, or at least I was sharing the discovery that was comic book YouTube. So Ghost Critic and Damien were the two that I watched kind of religiously. Every single time there was a video out from either of them, I would watch and kind of checked in and caught up on videos and things. I could say that Travis Oddfellow's Thoughts was definitely in that group as well. At the time, Comic Book Mom was around. I was watching her stuff as well. I thought her stuff was really great because she talked about it from kind of a viewpoint of a parent. There was some of that stuff in there, and there was some kind of all ages comics that she talked about. I believe at the time, it's been an absolute year and a day since Comic Book Mom was around. She may have lasted a couple of years when I started, but then she faded off just with family and things, as happens. A lot of people transitioned. Where did I put that other? Oh, it's right here. And maybe we'll talk about this too, because we can go through this. Actually, we'll kind of go through this because there's going to be some old school people in here, and there's going to be some new school. Well, actually, a lot of people that weren't here or that aren't here anymore are going to appear in this little YouTube value stamp book that we did back in April 2016. One of the projects, you know, at the time there was a lot of community projects. There was a lot of community videos. There were lots of tag videos. I feel like my video is lagging here a little bit. Hopefully I'm not too beat. It'll be a bit back to where we started. There was a lot of those kind of tag videos and things, and there was a lot of projects going on. So that was one that I kind of tried to do with a bunch of people that I watched and was friends with. I thought it would be something fun. So also in that time, I was also watching guys like Costin Bromstar, watched a bit of Howler Mouse, watched the one and only Captain Cummings. And yes, we will say his name once or twice. I hope that doesn't invoke any demons. But there was a lot of people around at that. Well, I guess there wasn't a lot of people. There was people that came before the crowd that I kind of got introduced to. Um, and I'm not. I think Wednesday Serial Matt, I think, is much better at a telling of this particular part of the history, because he was, if not the first, one of the very first, I believe. And please don't quote me on any of that stuff. But at that time, there wasn't a lot of us on here doing the comic book thing, talking about comics. And honestly, I wish I could remember exactly how I stumbled onto these videos. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe I was looking for comic creator interviews. I honestly don't remember how my searching brought up Ghost Critic and Sleepy Reader and Oddfellows Thoughts, because I know for sure those three would have been kind of the first ones that I saw, and then kind of dug in from there and discovered other people. Of course, John DaCosta, another Canadian, Costin Bromstar, who I think I also mentioned, another Canadian as well too. So it was good to see. Even at that time, there was a few of us from a couple of different places. UK and North America were sort of the core of what I remember at that time, of people that were around. Lots of people from the States, a couple from Canada, and even less from the UK, until we started seeing people like Dr. Monkeybot and La Raza started jumping on. So however we all came to find this little nook on YouTube, I was watching these videos and they were talking about books, some books that I knew, some books that I had read or were reading. There was a real focus at that time on new comics. So I guess as sort of as hung over for this entire time here. But that's kind of where the focus was at first. And of course, Damien, correct me on any of this stuff as I'm going here. So it was interesting to kind of see that there was people talking about these books, and not just saying, hey, this one was cool or this one was that, and throwing it over the shoulder, but actually having something to say about the story, actually having something to say about the art, talking about it in a little more in-depth way. Now, Colin has told me about the Fantagraphics message boards. So message boards for comics weren't my thing. I didn't know about it. I didn't even think of joining something like that. I kind of wish I had known about the Fantagraphics one, though. I think that would have been fun. But I did know about message boards and that kind of interaction. It was mostly music message boards, noise community, Southern Lord, so like doom metal and that sort of thing. So message boards like that I was checking out, and I was very active in that side of things. And I loved that back and forth. I loved the sharing of what you were listening to at that time, and then coming to YouTube, what you were reading. I really dug that, and that still sticks with me to this day. I love seeing what people are reading. I love seeing. I'm one of the people that does love a haul video, because I love to see what people are picking up, and I love to see the era of the books they're picking up, and maybe there's an artist that was associated with the book that I didn't know about, and you get to see a couple of pages. So it was something that I found that I was commenting on videos, and still that, again, that kind of holdover from the message boards, using the comments section as kind of a message board where you at least could get some messages back and forth. Sometimes, though, I have one or two things to say. So I was missing something. Like, there was an immediate interaction that I wanted to participate in a little more. So I started thinking of what it would take to do a channel, and started looking into it. And then eventually just kind of pumped myself up and did a video, and just figured I'd just start it. At the time, I had an idea that I was going to name all the episodes, number all the episodes. I really didn't think it would last as long as 10 years. No idea at the time. I thought it would be this thing that I would do for a little bit, and eventually either it would all go away, or I would get sick of it, or whatever. Turns out I didn't get sick of it. Turns out I still do enjoy the interaction. And especially now at this time, Lona Cannon and I have talked about it offline a couple of times. The amount of people and little kind of movements that you feel like you've seen, and then seen their asses leave the door, as they kind of move on from this to something else, to go terrorize other people or whatever it is that they leave to do. So you end up kind of seeing these groups of people coming through. And I just really didn't think that it would last. You thought it would last a few months. Hey, Damien, that's interesting. I don't know if I put that specific a time limit on it, but I'm totally with you. I really didn't think it would last very long. But I knew that it was something that I wanted to participate in and I wanted to kind of contribute. And I just love that idea. I've always loved that idea. Any of the hobbies that I have, whether it's synthesizers and music, whether it's making noise, whether it was in rock bands, whether it's comics, whether it's records, whatever it is that I'm kind of into, part of the fun of all of it is sharing it with people and kind of talking about it and, all of that kind of thing that goes along with it, that kind of friendship that happens through there, I could say. And once I got in, it was, especially at that time, not saying it's not like that now. I think it's a lot different now than what it was at that time. When somebody did a video, everybody would kind of watch, especially the early ones. And then once you got a sense of who this person was, then you would kind of either keep subbing and watch religiously, or you'd sort of drift away based on what your interests were. But right off the top, there was always a very, very welcoming and kind of warming hello to the community. Like, people watched the videos, they would talk, they would give you shout outs in their video. Hey, there's a new channel. I think I got a shout out on Ghost Critics. I know I got shout outs on Damien's channel as well too. But so kind of having that next step, if they have that next step, sorry, let's just do this. I just got an email. Let me try this. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. Just stand by on that, and then I'll share that in a second. It was very welcoming, very encouraging, and right off the hop, nobody really had bad things to say. Now, what I discovered was that unfortunately there was a kind of behind the scenes darker side of some of the YouTube knuckleheads at the time. And from what I understand, again, I was really how I am now, where I'm very selective with social media. I feel like I'm much looser now, which might be a surprise. I'm much looser now than I was at the beginning. I really hyper curated my social media to almost a fault at times. I just did not want to participate in anything like that. And it was the same thing with the message boards. One of the things that started burning me out of visiting the message boards, specifically Southern Lord, was just the bullshit that would go on. What do you call them? Keyboard warriors? Is that what it is? The horseshit that people would say online that they would never in a million years have the balls to say to your face. It started just getting too much. I don't particularly like drama in my real life. I sure as fuck don't like drama online, because I can't grab you by by the scruffs of your shirt and pull you closer to me online like I can in person if you talk some bullshit, right? So I really don't have patience for that kind of thing. So I know that there was stuff going on, and I caught the glimpses of some things. And honestly, when it kind of reached ahead, or when it looked like it was reaching ahead, I just started unsubscribing and blocking people. I don't want to get into a talk too much about that, but there was just some absolute bullshit. I don't know how a movement like Comicsgate actually started, but I would say that unfortunately for us in the community at the time, Captain Cummings was that was the first time I started hearing about that sort of thing. He was always a little gruff. I'd talked to him a few times online. I think I appeared on a video with him at one point. And I enjoyed some of the interactions at the time. Hello, Gore Vidal. I did get your email. I'm just going to tell this story and then I'll share it. Yeah, and it seemed like, as Damien was saying, there was a behind-the-scenes crisis every 6 months for a while. It's very true. And I just didn't want to hear about it, really. I mean, of course, I'm a human being, so of course I was curious. And of course, if I caught a nugget, I would be interested to hear it out or anything. But, I mean, that's only natural, I think, when that kind of stuff is going on. But it really got to a head with this whole fake nerd bullshit, this Comicsgate bullshit, this isn't my comics and blah, 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 and SJWs and all that bullshit. I blocked a number of people and stopped watching their videos. So it felt like that kind of happened a couple of years into it, maybe, Damien. I don't really remember a timeline, but it felt like a whole bunch of people started fighting and that fractured things and sent people off and sent people away. One of the best things that happened to that, to go back to a more positive note, was Captain Cummings had a roundtable, like weekly discussion, and he would have a lot of guests on it, and he would bring all these people on and they just sit around and talk books. I watched a couple of his. I felt like they were a little, to be honest, they were a little too intense for me. Um, those kind of personalities, as strong as my personality can be sometimes in real life, um, their personalities were pretty strong. And there was a lot of like joking and stuff that I just didn't really get an entertainment out of. So I didn't watch them that much. Now, somehow or other, and you need to talk to Travis Oddfellow's thoughts to see exactly how this went. But he kind of took over. He kind of got control to some degree, or it was gifted, or I don't know the proper word. That weekly comic chat was handed over to Travis. I think at the time, one of the other things that were happening, and again, Damien would have to tell me if this is true or not. I feel like there was a lot of people trying to curate the comic book experience on YouTube. Like, you can only do things on Mondays, you're on Tuesdays. No, you can't do something on Friday because we have a show on Friday. It seemed like there was this real back and forth of people kind of dealing with those sorts of things. So either way, however it ended up, the king of Friday night became Travis, and Oddfellow's thoughts with his roundtable, weekly roundtable chat, where kind of how I always talk, and a couple of us always talk to this day. Anybody is welcome at any time. It's not about sitting and watching, it's about participation. And that's how Travis's was as well too. So I remember watching kind of religiously every week, and I would see people come on. And eventually, because I knew Travis a little bit, not as well as a lot of other people did, I kind of braved having a reaching out to him to say, hey, I would love to be a guest. I think before that time, before appearing on, I don't know if my first time kind of chatting with people on camera was part of Travis's stream, or if Damien and I had done something before that. I don't remember the timeline. Um, I'd have to kind of look back at the videos. I mean, that was my interpretation of it, Damien. Like I said, I wasn't involved in it. That just seemed to be the way that it was, because there really seemed to be a little bit of, my show is on this day and you can't compete, because there was such a small group of us. It really, there was that type of thing that, if you were going to do a live show, you were doing it. Yeah, that could very well be as well, Damien, because I had reached out to him as well, because he had always said, like, hey, if you're ever interested, please get in touch and we'll have you on and we'll book something. All I remember is the first time that I was on that show, man, was I fucking nervous. I was not prepared mentally for it. I really felt anxious, because again, it was starting to break that, like, one of those things of doing these videos and sending them out. Even though somebody is responding to you, I'm still kind of safe right here in front of this camera. I'm still safe to record something. There's no immediate interaction. It's kind of delayed. So the other thing was seeing these people in person and talking to them and trying to respect their format and trying to respect their show and all these other things, was just very strange. And it was really the first couple of times, but especially that first time, man, I was nervous. Like, holy shit, I'm actually talking to Travis in real time. I'm actually talking to Damien in real time, actually talking to these people in real time. And it was, you wanted to be prepared. You wanted to get your P's and Q's. You wanted to make sure that you didn't fuck up. You had some extra information. So it was a bit of, anxiety at that time, which obviously fades away the more you do it. Also at that time, it was newer. The kind of doing a live show and having people on was a newer experience for everybody. So I think people were also just trying to figure it out. But that was a real kind of turning point. Once those live streams started happening and the ability to do this and not have to always, Yeah. Those early live streams were nerve-wracking. The way the camera moved from person to person was weird. Absolutely. Um, that sort of signaled the kind of beginning of another area. Holy shit. Real time is weird. Speaking of real time, it's the one and only Russ Works. Holy hell, man. This is a very nice surprise. Thank you very much, Russ. It's really, really good to see you. I mean that. That's amazing that you were able to turn up. So kind of making that transition into the live streams was something that once you got used to it, it was so natural. Editing videos, I tried not to edit too much. I didn't really have the computer. I didn't really have the capability to do a really nice editing job. So I always felt it was a little like it was a bit of a pain in the ass. So live videos were kind of where I eventually turned to and where I've kind of stayed doing these live streams. And again, it's all about this immediate interaction. So even if you're not right on camera with me, there is this messaging back and forth that can happen in this conversation that can happen in real time, which I do love. Um, we'll have a quick look through the YouTube value stamp and see what other names we have. So what do we have there? We have the one and only Captain Cummings. So that's a collector's item there. And then beside him is Custom Bromstar. Why not art? Absolutely. Tony, another early guy that was around. I remember seeing his first kind of art piece that he did for people, where it was people from the comic community in a piece of art that kind of got sent out. He sent out kind of copies of it to everybody. Tony is still around. He doesn't really do videos anymore. I talk to him sometimes on Instagram. He always reaches out on Father's Day and birthday kind of thing. Like, he's a super, super nice guy. He's always been a really good dude. It's been a pleasure knowing him this whole time. Custom Bromstar, I should say some things about Custom Bromstar. I did end up on live videos with him once or twice, not too often, but Custom Bromstar was an amazing, amazing guy, and I'm sure still is an amazing guy. He sort of popped up. He had a couple of blips here in the last few years, but they were kind of short-lived blips. His videos were entertaining. He was really funny. He seemed genuinely, genuinely nice. It wasn't any sort of presentation. It wasn't something where he was looking to get free books from publishers or looking to advertise when that became a thing. He was doing it because he loved it, you know, and that's kind of what I gravitated to. And I think a lot of us who have stuck around this long, we've gravitated more to these kind of interactions as opposed to the other side of YouTube. Not saying we don't all dabble in that, but I think that this is the thing. The legitimacy was really nice. Who else do we have there? We, of course, have Mr. Joan and Jello right there. And then, of course, we have La Raza. So Joan and Jello is, I knew from the gaming community, the board game community. He turned me on to Mushroom Eaters and Cave Evil and those crew of game designers. And he was just always a guy I could talk to really easily. As some of you know, incredibly nice guy. You couldn't ask for a nicer guy to hang out with. And then, of course, Rasa. So I sort of remember when Rasa made her appearance, it was a bit of a thing, and it was because there just wasn't a lot of women in the community. There was a few, but there wasn't that many. And it seemed like there was a period there where it started to really peak. It started to kind of climb the number of women that were associated. Mercy's little show was on there as well too, and there was other ones. But when Rasa came on, there was something a bit different because Rasa had just kind of started reading comics not too long before that. So she didn't kind of have it as something that she was growing up with very closely in her childhood. So it was kind of a nice perspective from somebody who was new and exploring. And you can see the creative side in her, pardon me, right from the beginning. So I remember we kind of became friendly online, like, again, just through messages and things like that. And that just kind of grew. Our friendship kind of just grew from that. Sent her a box of comics of stuff that I thought she would really enjoy. Some things that were maybe a little more indie as well too, to kind of help expose her to a bunch of different things. And we just kind of remained friends ever since then. So huge shout out to Rasa. Yeah, Rasa completely shared her drawing journey, and it was just really great. And again, it was the personality. It's just there's good people that kind of have stuck around, right? So that makes it I think that's part of what makes it easy to kind of keep doing these things, is because there's still quite a few really solid people doing this and participating, right? And then we still have an option, as opposed to everything else that's going on in the other comic book YouTube world. And then speaking of, this is Reader 1717, also a Canadian, I think just from outside of Toronto, or was she in Toronto? I don't remember. And then beside her is Mercy's Little Show. She was great too. Mercy was really great. I still see her on Instagram as well too. My son, let me see if I can see things here. My son had a comic book channel for 5 minutes. He did a few videos, but he appeared a lot with me as well. So that was his stamp there. And beside him is Mr. Tim Morant, who was gone for a bit, kind of started again, but then left again. This is Christina Iriarty, I think is how you pronounce the last name. So she was around for a bit as well too. And again, somebody else looking at some more indie type of comics. Literally Graphic, when Literally Graphic started, she's still around. She still does video. I don't watch nearly as many of them as I should, and I really should get back into watching her stuff. I still subscribe. I still see that she's around making videos and talking about a lot of like indie books, and a lot of books that just don't get talked about enough on YouTube. So it's great to see that she's still going. I should really check in with her and talk to her forever. J Rocks is there. My man Spiro.geek with his Gru picture. Spiro, another guy who we hit it off immediately as soon as we started talking. That was it. We've done a number of live videos together. We've chatted offline, done phone calls across the globe with each other, that sort of thing. So huge shout out to Spiro. He's a hell of a guy. He's got a lot of kind of things that he's into, and it's always great to chat with him. He's a really just a good dude. And then everybody's favorite, Mr. Gore Vidal. I mean, what can we say about Gore? Gore is an unbelievable YouTuber, and I always appreciate kind of hearing anything he wants to add. I don't want to put you on the spot here, Gore, but I know you're in the room. But I do appreciate Gore's friendship as well too. After that, we have ETA Nick right here. Long live ETA Nick. I mean, the guy came onto the YouTube scene with his grading videos, and that kind of marked, I guess, what would be another era of YouTube. We started seeing more people talking about grading. We started to see more people talking about slabbing. We started to see more people talk about selling books, which I think is kind of like, if we were to put it into 3 phases, my 10 years into 3 phases, there was kind of the introductory years and the drama years where people kind of left, and fights happened and stuff. And then there was the round table years with Travis, I would say. And then we now have the new era, which is kind of the slabbing and the investments and that sort of thing, right? So not that ETA Nick is single-handedly responsible for this by any stretch. It's just he was one of those guys I hadn't really ever thought of grading that much. And then again, he was just another guy who would also do videos focusing on artists and talking about comics as well as doing those other things, even though his channel really moved towards more of the investment and analysis of the stock market and the comics market, etc. He wasn't always kind of in that, he wasn't always that way. He had a wide variety of stuff, so it was always interesting to hear what he had to say about things. Mr. Jared Osborne, of course, you can't go wrong with Jared. He's been around forever and a day too. I don't know how I would have first discovered Jared, but yeah, I don't really, yeah, little did we know Nick's approach would dominate. Yeah, I don't really know how I first discovered Jared Osborne, to be honest. But again, like, just a unique perspective, another guy who likes indie books as well, which is right away somebody that I'm going to feel a little bit of a kinship to. And then who do we have? We have Wednesday's Serial, who never did end up doing a stamp. So his is in memoriam of Wednesday Serial. Beside him, of course, John DaCosta. What can you say about John DaCosta? He's another Canadian. He was kind of off the rails right from the beginning. He was always very comedic and doing videos in his washroom and stuff. But he again had a lot of interests, some indies and undergrounds as well. But Batman was his big thing, so he had his weekly Bat Chat or whatever it was. I think it was weekly anyway, which was always entertaining to hear these guys talking about their Batman books. Big Shot Comics over here. Big Shot Comics was the AFPC of his time. Big Shot Comics was an amazingly unusual guy who I kind of just gravitated towards his videos immediately. They were definitely more on they weren't as kind of as professional and kind of produced as AFPC's stuff was, but it was definitely closer to that end of the spectrum. He was talking about books that didn't get much conversation. He was talking about very arty books and underground books and that sort of thing. A good dude. He was around for a little while. Another guy I was always trying to get, I wanted to kind of have a conversation with him in real time, and it just never panned out, unfortunately. And I think he just kind of got burnt out from YouTube, as happens with people, but he was great. Solid 4 ST Bend is there with his Flash. Solid 4 ST Bend and Captain Strangelife and guys like that. Hippie, what's the hippie guy's name? I can't remember right now, but it seemed like there was also that crew of older gentlemen who were really had a history with books and really had a big collection of stuff and really liked kind of the not quite the haul videos, but showing off books, which again was still fun, even though sometimes they didn't talk much about the history or focusing specifically on an artist or a story. It was always interesting to see what they had to add to things. So there was also that kind of world that was coexisting alongside. There were Tom Hippie's Collectibles. That's it. Thank you. And then of course mine at the bottom there. There you go. And then there was a couple of bonus stamps as well. So this was ETA Nick Anthony, his son, did a stamp for us. So we included that as a bonus stamp because I thought it was a fantastic drawing. And, you know, having kids of my own, it really kind of, it was nice to see that there was someone else that was involving their children. And then Dr. Von Chilla. I can't believe I completely just drew a blank right there. Dr. Von Chilla, of course, another close friend of ETA Nick, and a unique guy as well. I think he still makes videos sometimes. I feel like he pops up. Yeah, they were. It's a good question. They absolutely were. So for a little bit, we did this every week. Somebody would do a video. So if you were on the week of April 3rd to 9, one video during that week that you did, you just had to mention the stamp and then send the link for the stamp. And I had an Imgur page going where anybody who wanted to could download all the stamps, download the book that I laid out, and kind of make your own and kind of follow along at home. So it was kind of this idea of following people's channels. No, I didn't. Yours is there, Damien. Right here. Did I not say you? Yeah, of course. There's Damien, Sleepy Reader 666, right there, beside Mr. Tony Why Not Art. And of course, again, Damien I've known for a long time. I think the person that we often say this to each other. I think we've known each other the longest on YouTube, out of anybody else that I know on YouTube. I think kind of again from like day one, pretty much it was talking to Damien, leaving comments on his videos, and Ghost Critics would have been the two guys that I kind of communicated the most with at the top, off the top. So the idea of this was then, you know, again, because the community was smaller, it was, and again, for this kind of checking out everybody's videos, participating. Yeah, they're all self-portraits, how you put yourself, depending on like your favorite characters, that sort of thing, that you then kind of put yourself right into it. And that was taken from Tony for sure. That idea was for sure from Tony, because that's what he was doing with the YouTubers, drawing them so they looked kind of like their favorite comic book characters. So that was way longer than I intended to talk about the history here on YouTube, but I appreciate you all listening to that. Needless to say, though, it's one of the things that I'm going to keep going on with. I don't feel like it's stopping. I feel like I found something that I still enjoy doing, even though it's dramatically different from some of the stuff I was doing. Talking about music, like Damien talked about the vinyl collection videos. I did that for a little while. Talking about board games, I eventually started a second channel on board games, and I don't think I've added anything to that channel in years. So it's one of the things of, I clearly still enjoy doing it. It's a different, even though there's some people that are the same. I think that there's a lot of people that have changed throughout the years, and one of the things that I know that I definitely strive to do is just always be really welcoming and inviting to people to come in, because without the people participating, it ain't much. It's just me sitting talking to a camera, right? Which, I don't know, that's not that exciting. So I've always been one to kind of encourage people to start channels, and in some people's case, Gore Vidal loading the cannon, although Gore Vidal was doing videos, trying to push them into, like live videos. Honored to have Gore Vidal on his first live stream with us on one of our Sunday chats. I thought that was fantastic. So at this point, Gore had sent a video, so I will throw that in there. And if anybody wants to jump on, by all means, please do so. No pressure, no, whatever you feel like doing. And I was just going to continue talking about books, but just to wrap it up, I don't know how long I'm going to do this for. I don't know if there's another 10 years in me for this. I don't know if there's another year. I don't even know. I honestly don't think of it like that. I'm still enjoying it. There are times where it does feel a little bit like a chore. So I think I've grown comfortable enough with this, then I just don't do a video, or we just don't have a Sunday chat. You know what I mean? Like there's long been there hasn't been any pressures for me to perform videos or put on videos in a long time. I never really thought of it like that. I know that some of the guys that were doing videos started thinking about it like that, like this pressure of doing a weekly stream and a weekly video to talk about weekly books. My channel has always been all over the place, that there wasn't any kind of weekly thing to do until recently. And this Sunday wrap just happened naturally. I know that not everybody wants to sit through sometimes a 3-hour conversation, and I totally get that. So I thought it was a nice way to just quickly talk about the books that I did speak about in our Sunday chat. So if you were interested in that, you could just watch that video and see the books that I talked about. So that's the only sort of schedule that I put for myself. But as you've seen, sometimes that Sunday chat, that Sunday wrap turns into a Thursday wrap or a Saturday wrap. I'm by no means locked into Sunday night. It's just Sunday night generally works best for me. So I'm around, I'm here. I'm going to be here. If you ever want to join us on our Sunday chats, please reach out to us. We'd love to have you. We're always open to have a conversation, at least. And I mean, there's going to be some things that are going to encompass that, right? Like if we feel that what you want to discuss is going to jive with our show, all three of us have to be in agreement. If one person isn't in agreement, we don't do it. That's just the way it goes. I never want to make it something where people feel forced to do something. I never want it to feel like that. I always want it to just be fun, plain and simple. And if somebody's stressed out because of it, I don't even want to go down that path. I don't think that that's worth it at all. I could also sit and list off a million other channels. I got to give a special shout out, though, to Dr. Monkeybot. Again, if it wasn't for Dr. Monkeybot, we wouldn't have been doing these Sunday chats. It was his idea at first to kind of do a live stream on Sunday during the pandemic. He was kind enough to invite me on once. Then we invited Rasa on, and then we did a chat together, the three of us. And I really miss that guy. He was a hell of a guy. He's still a great guy. I'm sure he's still an amazing guy. But he was so enjoyable to watch, and it was really nice to hang out and kind of interact with him. Very, very, very nice guy. So I hope he's doing well and his family is doing well. And so let's talk about some books that I read this week. Enough of that sappy shit. So a couple of the books that I talked about already in the chat this afternoon. This one is called Horse, and it was issue one of a 3-issue miniseries from Slave Labor Books. I'll look at the year in 1 second there. This was from 1989, and I'm going to do the credits properly this time here. That I screwed up. Oh, come on. There you go. That I screwed up in the chat. Somebody in the chat had mentioned that the artist Hui Han Lui has gone on to painting and was able to find some art online. Raphael Neves was the writer of this. This was pretty entertaining for something that seemed to kind of change genres as the book went on. It sort of started out this couple having some marital woes. Turns out the guy is a thief, which she was completely aware of. It wasn't a mystery to her. She knew what his life was when they got into it, I think he says at one point. So we have that kind of that drama going on. So you think that you're going to focus on him, and it turns out you focus on her. Hello, look at this. What do we have here?
Hey.
Hi, how are you? I'll pause that for 1 second.
I'm wearing my Keep Comics Weird in your honor.
Excellent. That's awesome. Beauty.
Anyway, cheers.
How are you doing? Cheers. How are you? What's going on? How was your day today?
It was good. There was a Labor Day sale at my comic shop, so I got a lot of comics.
Ooh.
And I've been having a good weekend with the family.
Nice.
I did tell them that I was going to be on with you. So
you did or didn't?
them for a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I see. Yeah.
But I think we both have lasted because we don't make a schedule for ourselves and that kind of thing. Like, I think that might have been one of the keys. You know, if you need a break, you take a break. If you feel like going on, you go on. And so it's not a burden.
And I think also not locking into one particular kind of format. Like, I didn't base my channel around just talking about underground comics. I didn't base it on just talking about new books. You know what I mean? There was always a mix. And I think it's the same with you too. Like, always a mix of things that we end up talking about, because if it's not fun for me to talk about, if I'm not excited about it, why would I want to do a video on it? You know, so it's sticking. I guess if there was any focus, it's sticking on the things that are exciting, you know, like the thrills that you get. Right. So.
Yeah, I never wanted more than just to, you know, hang out with some other comic book fans. So that's the way it's been easy.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that's the best way to look at it too, like just hanging out with other fans and trying to, you know, all appreciate the same hobby together.
Right.
One of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about earlier was just this, because Gore Vidal often has asked why our story is so important. And I would kind of go one further. I think for myself, like, art is just incredibly important to me. Sorry, I'm getting... Okay. He'll be in the chats. Gore Vidal, I got your email. That's too bad. Hopefully something can rectify itself, because we'd love to see you.
Was Gore
the focus
thinking
has
of
always
coming
been on art. He was trying to, he was having a bit of problems on his end. So the importance of art in my life has always been one of those things, like a driving kind of force. And I imagine with people with comics, whether it's the story side of things or whether it's the visual arts or a combination of everything, there's something to this kind of importance of having art in your life in some way. I think it really kind of allows you to get this different perspective. It allows you to, even if it's just appreciate something and kind of taking your mind off of everything else and focusing. I've always gotten a little more out of it, where it's this idea of these ideas that can get sent to another human being through art, whether it's music, films, that sort of thing. I love that we're all sort of in our own shells. We all kind of see this reality. So being able to see somebody else's reality and kind of escape your body a little bit, I think is really, really powerful and important. And again, that can happen through just lines on a page, when you see the way somebody interprets their world visually, or the storytelling. And what I often talk about is like the subtext to things, right? Just the subtext to the stories that can really resonate.
Well, and I think it's a way to experience. I mean, it's the same as what you're saying, but in different words, a way to experience life in a lot of different ways than just inside your own head.
Right.
And then talking about it is a new way of sharing an experience also, that we all, and apparently there aren't millions of people out there who love the combination of words and pictures the way a lot of us do. So it's
Right.
hard for a lot of us to find people like that till we had YouTube.
Yeah, it's true. And here we go. Let's see.
Same as what you're saying, but in different words, a way to experience life.
Oh, Gore Vidal, we can hear you. We can't see you, though.
Inside your own head. Right. And then talking about it.
Oh, maybe he can't hear us.
Experience also. Huh. And
I'm just going to mute his microphone there.
So
Yeah, I
there's
think
no
that's the
picture
thing.
of him coming through at all.
There's not. It's just a little screen that popped up.
Huh.
So I just muted him, and we'll see
He's
if
discovered
there's
a new
chat.
feature of StreamYard that we didn't even know about.
Yeah, that you can just do it audio. Device is not connected is what it says. Okay, sorry, Gore. So yeah, I think that's a good point too, like that then communication, also helping absorb the story, sharing the story, that sort of thing. So yeah, it really helps. So while Gore is trying to connect, I'll just go back to talking about Horse there. So it had the bonus of this kind of drama story that was happening and this kind of crime story that was starting to build up. But then it takes a turn where we start getting these fantasy elements and kind of mystical and magical elements as well too. And we actually see, let me see if I can find a good shot. We have the man called Horse that makes an appearance. And I can't find it. Here we go. So you get a hint at it on this page here. Actually, I'm gonna make myself.
It's not related to the
bigger.
movie The Man Called Horse, is it?
I don't think it is. I have two people waiting in the back room. I'll just finish this
Okay.
thought and then I'll let you fellas in. I do see you both there though. So it was really nice that it kind of made these twists and turns to something that was a little bit of an engaging story with some really beautiful art that was kind of a little bit Topi, a little bit Alex Nino, but not quite there yet. But there was elements of that in there, which was really nice. But now let's bring on. Let's see. There's one.
Can you hear me?
There's
Yes, we can hear you.
two.
And see you.
Look at this. Look at these
Hey,
fine
hey,
gentlemen
Terrence,
making an
Chris,
appearance.
Gore,
Hey,
this is
Chris.
the first time
Chris has a friend there we haven't met before.
This is the first time I've talked to Gore. Who?
The dog?
Oh,
You see
yes.
my
Have you
dog?
seen the dog before?
That's Misha. Yeah. Hi, Misha. She'll show her comments
Gentlemen,
later.
thanks
They're
for
all
coming,
clipped.
gentlemen. It's good to see you both. How are you?
Nice cup.
Very good.
Yeah, good. Gore, this is Chris.
Congratulations,
Chris, this
10
is
years
Gore.
is a long time.
It sure is.
No, I have to say, since I have you and Damien here, I didn't. Maybe I told you guys back in February this. I mean, when I got on YouTube, I mean, you guys were already here, and certainly you guys were beyond welcoming. And I think certainly with Damien there, Damien, I think, is the old guard when it comes to just the red carpet for all the newbies that come in.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first video I saw from Damien was him discussing Planetary, and as one of the comics, I think, that got him back into the medium. And we began chatting, and eventually through him and Tim Arant, and I decided to just jump on YouTube. But I don't think it would have worked if it wasn't for that. For all the people you mentioned in that recap, many of whom are no longer with us on YouTube. And that's almost most of those people I either was subscribed to, or probably still am, or I chatted with in the videos. And it's hard to believe it's been 10 years. I mean, it's maddening. And certainly watching Damien and yourself with your children just grow up. I mean, it's nice, but it's very bizarre. So, but in a very
And I think
really
both
bizarre.
our beards have gotten a lot whiter.
It's true. And I've lost a lot more hair up at the back here that I often don't put on camera.
You know, it's one of the benefits of not doing any of these live streams is maybe you can see the wrinkles on my hands.
Yeah.
But you haven't seen me age over these last
Right, you're
8,
fairly
9 years that I've
ageless.
been here.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons I don't do these things. And,
Yeah.
But I know I met you last time, and Chris, it's finally good to see you, Chris. And finally get to meet you after all these years.
Yeah, very. I'm excited to hear that you were getting on. I went and clicked on the link before Terrence could delete it.
I remember
Well,
when Chris first came on, I was so glad he's not talking about specking. He's talking about reading books.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
like this hasn't died yet.
No, Chris would have fit in great with us, 8 years ago. But before I continue, I had to show this to Terrence.
Amazing.
Rose Tyler.
That's
Our
amazing.
favorite Rose Tyler.
Excellent.
Hold on. Just bear with me. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. Is that something you just got, Gore, or has that been on your desk for a long time?
Yeah, Terrence and I, we both share an affinity for Rose Tyler. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's okay. There must be a delay.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry. Yeah, Terrence and I, we both share this desire for Rose, and certainly some of the companions of the Doctor. But Rose was there at the beginning, and it's fascinating how the love interest continued all the way to Capaldi's end, and how wonderfully painful those episodes were with the companions. It's wonderfully painful love stories. And that's why I'm always so cheery all the time.
One thing I wanted to say, because you were talking about Damien, I just want to say this. Colin has said that Damien is like the mayor of this corner of the comic book.
That's about right. That's right.
That kind of welcoming, and
I agree with that.
Well, I don't do anything on purpose. It just happens, whatever it is. I watch videos that I like. I feel compelled to type comments.
Yeah, absolutely.
And well, I used to a lot more encourage people commenting to start their own channels.
Mm-hmm.
I still do occasionally, but I think I've gotten out of that habit.
Yeah. I still do that. I still encourage. If there's somebody on Twitter or somebody that I'm talking to that shows even a speck of interest, or they're talking about something that I think is interesting, I often I'll send them a quick message on Twitter and say, "Hey, have you ever thought of doing videos?"
Did you do that for Loading McCammon? So that's a big victory if you got him on.
Yeah, it was. I mean, he was already talking to somebody about doing videos. I just happened to be another voice that he could add to it. But yeah, absolutely for Colin. Encouragement watching his Twitter and stuff, because I mean I'm greedy like that. I want stuff that I can watch on YouTube ultimately is what it's about, and then it just so happens if other people watch it, that's great, because then it encourages them to keep going. But it's purely selfish that I just want to see these books in person, a little more detail, and just hear what people have to say. Like we were talking about before, it's great to hear what people have to say and what it means to them when they read these books and what it means to kind of their world, so I think that's huge to hear that stuff.
Sounds like you convinced the comic board to get on Twitter, so the other way around on that one.
Oh,
yeah. Hey. Okay. Well, I'll take that credit. Absolutely. That's good. I'm glad
he's on Twitter now.
Yeah. At least
that's right. Yeah.
No Twitter for me. Little flip phone.
No
right?
Twitter.
Right.
No, not with your flip phone.
Right.
I think you can with your flip phone. It might be the only one that you can do.
Right there. I like to torment my friends' kids. They all have. I mean, everyone I know has children, and sometimes when they'll be around, I'll just step out. I'll have the phone like this, and I'll just do this. Then I'll just nod and walk away.
Yeah.
And then when they'll see me later, what are you doing? Well, I'm calling my ride. I'm just saying, oh, you missed it. And they'll just look at me, and then I'll just walk away. I do this to them all the time, so they think I'm not from Earth. Right? So they've never seen one of these before. And,
now we're getting to the point where kids have never seen the flip phone.
Yeah.
I wish it was easy to take my SIM card out, because there's times where I just rather have the flip. I'm not going to ever go back to a flip phone like you, Gore, but there's times where I wish I just had the flip phone so I could just make a call if I need to. I don't need the big phone.
They're reliable.
Right.
It falls and it works. Although when I went to vote a few years ago, I went to the city hall, and there was 2 young security men there. And you have to, put your phone and anything in the little tray. I took this out. They did not know what this was. They looked
Yeah.
at it and they said, "What is that?"
Not
And
that
I took
old.
the phone, and one had to get it, and he goes, "Oh, that's right." I mean, they didn't know what it was. So
Yeah.
anyway, enough
Hilarious.
phone.
So what's going on, Chris? What's happening? What are you reading there?
Nothing much. I missed your beginning. I came and clicked on the link, and then I went real quick to see how long you've been on. I was watching the game. I was watching Game of Thrones. So
Okay, yeah.
I mean, did you go over? So you went over all the people on YouTube and stuff like
It was
that?
a good
Is that what-
recap.
I mean,
Chris. Yeah, it was good.
I didn't go over everybody. I'm sure there's a million people that I missed, and I could have talked probably hours just about the people,
Yeah.
but kind of went
You
over
mentioned
what I
Jake
consider,
Paul.
like,
You
the
mentioned
key
Jake
areas.
Paul, though, right?
Jake Paul?
You don't know
No, I
that.
didn't.
Never
Sorry,
mind.
no, sorry. That one's over my head. Sorry.
Is that a wrestling reference?
No, that's that big YouTuber that keeps boxing people.
Oh,
So
really?
never
Is that
mind.
true? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
just
no,
joking. I was
that's so
joking.
out of my radar. That
He
kind
stopped
of stuff.
showing He stopped showing comics years ago.
Right. I did.
No.
I did kind of dabble when I talked about Captain Cummings. That's as close as we got to talking Comics Gate.
I do remember the
Oh.
drama with Cummings. I do remember that.
Have
Oh,
you
I've
heard
heard
of
of- I've
Captain
heard of that.
Cummings? Have
You
you heard of
told me.
Captain Cummings, Chris?
You told me about him. You told me he was like a proto Comics Gate.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
But he was
yes,
one
I
of
talked
us
about-
before that.
He sure
Yeah,
was.
I
Yeah,
think-
and I mean, one of the kind of again that group of kind of first guys that I would have seen. He would have been one of them, absolutely. And again, that chat that he would have with people, I didn't watch it all the time, but that was some of the first kind of live stream chats that I saw where it was like, wow, this could be the next. It kind of showed what else this could be as opposed to just typing comments back and forth to each other, right, or shooting a video. So
Didn't he change his name, his channel name? Because I think I found it one time.
He may have.
possibly
He
did,
shut
yeah.
down and restarted a couple of times, and
Yeah.
last I know, disappeared again.
Yeah.
Because he got into fights with the other Comic Skates people too.
Hmm.
He's a feisty bastard.
Well, good for him.
Yeah, he picked fights with everybody. Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
I think I had one discussion with him on Twitter, and it was the kind of the final one because we weren't seeing eye to eye, which is totally fine, but he wouldn't let it go. And I was just like, yeah, nah, I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm done.
For 40
That's fine.
tweets too many.
Well, it was just even behind the scenes. It was just messages back and forth and really trying to convince me of something that's like, dude, you're just not gonna.
Oh,
And
yeah,
that was
that's
it.
the
And then
worst.
plus everything else that was going on in his videos, it was just like, nah, I'm done. I'm good. Yeah. So what should we talk about? What?
Yeah, Chris.
How's
What
things
are you?
going
I thought you
there?
wanted to keep doing your haul, but
Oh, I can keep doing it, but it feels like there's people here. We should just kind of chat and see what else is going on as opposed to the same thing.
well, I'm wondering, Gore, are you feeling like you are going to be making videos in the future?
Yeah, I just haven't been able to. I mean, I do have two iPhones that people have given me because they can't accept the fact that I don't have an iPhone. And
That's a great
so-
strategy to get a free phone.
I'm not
Yeah.
joking. In the '90s, that's how I got a VHS, and the
Oh, you were-
2000s, that's how I got.
You were a
a
Betamax guy.
No, I just didn't need one of those things, and
You
It
went
was
to the
a
movie
gaming
theater.
and so yes, eventually, yeah, I will, and I'll plan to do one, and then but when the weekend comes, something happens and I don't make it. So it's been quite a few already.
Well,
And
Gore,
there's
wait-
a new prepacks book coming out in a month or two, so obviously I have to
Mhm.
put on prepacks. And
You're-
11 Rockets is coming out, the box
Oh,
set.
yeah.
Are you going to get that box set
Yes,
I got it.
You already
already?
got it.
No, I haven't got it yet, but I
Pre-ordered
got
it.
it on Gmart for $280. So
Sweet.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
trying
wow.
to decide whether to get it or not.
Well,
I
my
almost got
comic shop-
Colin almost did it.
Well, my comic shop got it for me, and they're just going to give it for cost. They're not going to charge me the $400. I'm friends
Oh,
with
that's
the
pretty
owners,
great.
and they're very nice people. And they said,
Yeah.
"We'll just order it for you because you're the only person who's reading Love and Rockets in Corpus Christi."
Yeah, yeah.
And it's sad. It really is. I mean, the only other person who's reading Love and Rockets, his wife doesn't allow him to go to the comic shop anymore.
That's a weird
That's
relationship.
a bummer.
There was this guy. He was coming by, and
Who's his wife, Dr. Doom?
Well, he was coming by, and one day he came in, and he also had lived in Austin, and actually when I was living there, I lived there for a long time, and so he came in, and so we began discussing Austin. Then he began to discuss Love and Rockets, Cerebus. He knew who Mobius was. He knew who Prepax was. This was here. This is where I live. That's very unusual. So it was always great to see him at the comic shop every week. And then a month passes and no one has seen it. And finally, one day, one of the owners, the shop is owned by a couple, and one of the owners saw him at a Subway, and he says he was really embarrassed that he had not canceled his pull box, but he has to cancel his pull box. And he goes, "Well, what happened?" "Well, my wife thinks I'm spending too much money on comics, and she doesn't want me to go back anymore." And the thing is, he didn't read that many comics. He just pulled maybe 2 or 3 a week of the indies. That's about it. So, I mean, unless something was going on at home or something, but
She must have read his Creepax books.
Yeah.
No, he didn't have any prepacks. No, he didn't have any prepacks. But when it came to Love and Rockets, only 2 people ordered Love and Rockets, myself and him. So one sat there for months, and it wasn't until some girl came in and bought it. When I asked the owner, I said, "Oh, it's sold?" I go, "Yeah, some girl came in." I go, "Okay, I need you to find who that woman is. I need you to find it." And then he said, "Well," she goes, and then she laughed and she says, "She's quite young." And I go, "Perfect. It's perfectly fine." But it's true, because when I was younger, I dated older women. Now I date significantly younger women. So
Right.
You're keeping a cosmic balance there.
I'm very different.
You'll average out by the end. You'll average out as women his age.
Thank you. I need someone to defend me on this. And so now there is another Love and Rockets sitting there, and so maybe she'll come back. I have no idea. But I did tell the owners, if someone comes in, I want to know who it was. I want you to take a picture of this person. I need you to find who their next of kin. I need all kinds of information. So,
well, I mean, I guess
that's
a
romance movie.
Unfortunately,
joking
you can't
aside,
follow
I think
her on
that's probably
Twitter or
pretty rare
Facebook.
for you.
Maybe I should
that's right.
I know you should. Yeah. So yeah,
And
but
I
I'll be
guess
back
that's
to you.
all that is kind of rare for you too, Gore, right? Like from what I understand, what you've told me about in the past, it's that kind of thing. It probably is like a real, rose and a bushel of thorns, right? Like this idea of who kind of is.
No, this part of Texas is extremely, extremely mainstream on everything.
Right.
And there's a large Hispanic community here, but the assimilation here is, basically whatever top 10, whatever popular films, that's how it works. And anything you step a little bit on the side is not going to happen. And when I was a kid, I was just myself with reading Love and Rockets, and this kid was a punk rocker, and I was not into punk at the time. And we were the only ones. And the other guys who read comics, they read just Marvel and DC. And they would give us a hard time for reading American Flag because it was dirty, it had sex, it had cursing in it. It was just too weird. They wouldn't go near any of that stuff. And actually, that kid, many years later, I'm living in Austin, and I'm near the Capitol, Congress Avenue, which leads to the state Capitol. And I was working at the time for the Senate. And I'm walking to work, and I see him, and he recognized me, and I recognized him. And we're chatting. He's a waiter working at one of the swanky restaurants down there. And we began to discuss comics. And what is he reading? Sandman. And I go, I'm reading Sandman. And so, but he was really into Sandman. I mean, I like Sandman. Right. He really completely, as was when we were younger, into Love and Rockets. But that's the environment really down here. And so a comic shop, when I was a kid, when I lived here briefly, did have all these comics, but the people that were buying were the older audience, I remember. And so I don't know whatever happened to any of these comics. They had Warrior Magazine, they had Mage, they had Grendel, they had Cerebus, but I don't know whatever happened to those comics. I don't know who bought them.
Gilbert actually lives out here in Vegas.
Ah,
that explains a lot.
Huh.
Yeah, he lives out. He goes to Cosmic Comics, so one on the east side. That's definitely the comic shop I'd go to if I lived on that side of town.
Okay.
Right.
But I don't. I used to work there, and I would go there. I used to work around there. But yeah, he lives out there, and it's been a while. But there was an interview I remember him saying he loves going to the comic shop every Thursday or whatever day's not Wednesday, and he goes, I buy something maybe once every 2 months.
So if he was going to that one, what's the focus of that shop? Like Cosmic Comics, is it kind of a really nice mix of stuff, or is it kind of specialized in one area?
No, I think it's a good mix. I think it's both, and it's pretty big, but it's also not corporate. You know what I mean? You could feel like that. You see the owner there. The one that's like, the one that probably celebrates the Hernandez brothers the most is it used to be right by the Strip, and that feels more like an indie bookshop that does mostly comics.
Right.
But it's not that much fun to go to because they don't have a lot of back issues, but they're probably going to buy 3 or 4 of this Complete Love and Rockets. Those would be on the shelf. You know what I mean? And
right. Yeah.
and have a lot of Drawed and Quarterly and Fantagraphic stuff. But I don't think that one's that fun to go to, even though it has a lot of that kind of cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Because it doesn't have the back issues, or because it doesn't have like a multitude of choices?
I mean, it's probably the back issues, because you're not going to go in and spend $75 on, or $80 on the Topi book and stuff. And it does have some back issues. I filled in a lot of Alan Moore ABC is America's Best Comic stuff there. They do have some there, but yeah. Anyway, he goes to Cosmic Comics on the east side,
Right.
But, yeah, and his other brother still lives in Oxnard, probably.
Yeah, I think Jaime
Oxnard. Hey, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I think he does.
Is there a
I'm just
shop in
watching.
Vegas owned by some kind of rock star?
Yeah, the drummer of System of a Down owns Torpedo Comics, which is
Okay.
on the other side. And their tagline, they're probably the most corporate feeling one as far as like
Interesting.
being about spec. And they have a big vault inside the comic store where you see, all the old stuff.
Wow.
And he'd been collecting a long time. But their tagline is terrible. Their tagline is your favorite comic shop's favorite comic shop, which is the opposite. Like that's not, it's definitely not. It's a good shop, but and they're not afraid of carrying indies and stuff like that you can grab off the shelf. The one I go to, if you don't order, I go to one, he's still carrying indies because he's new, but eventually he's going to realize that I'm the only one buying them.
Yeah.
Yeah. They always do, right? They stop buying issue number 3, and then my other shop really doesn't that much. They've sort of learned and streamlined they know the clientele of the area and stuff. So, I mean, I can order it, but I'm not going to pick that off the shelf. So
No,
Yeah,
spec is huge here. It's the norm. I mean, it's almost,
yeah, it's huge.
it's absolutely impossible not to go into the shop, and the conversation that dominates everyone there is just 9.8, 9.6, no 4.0. No, did you get it clever? Did you get it clean? Do we have to wait a year for TGC? Complains about this. How much for that? This is the norm, and
Yeah, that's too hard for me.
it's tough. I mean, it really is, and that's why when people come in and actually want to discuss the stories. It's not that many. It's really
What drives me nuts most about Houston, though, is that your library district doesn't carry comics, doesn't carry any graphic novels except for manga. When you said that, I said he must be wrong, and I went and looked up the catalog. Right, you can obviously look up catalogs now. It's like there's not a single there's not even Sandman there. Like stuff that you would expect on any library nowadays. I almost called Houston on your behalf.
Houston used to have good bookstores, but then Houston and Austin used to have good used bookstores. And when I visited Austin a few years ago, but I mean used bookstores, just like when you watch a Woody Allen film, for example, those kind of bookstores, right? Books stacked everywhere.
Yeah.
Old books, first editions. I mean, not Stephen King, nothing like that.
Yeah.
And they were everywhere in Houston. They were everywhere in Austin. But by the 2000s, everything got decimated. Everything just went out. And Well, there's always been a small market for those books anyway. People who were buying the first Milan Kundera, the first Carlos Fuentes.
Thank goodness on.
Yeah, early James Joyce. Joyce would be very expensive. Although University of Texas at Austin does have Joyce's manuscripts, and UT in Austin has a wonderful library that has original manuscripts. I want to say Garcia Marquez, his papers are there, if I'm correct. So, but yes, it's that market. It's always been small, but it really just shrunk. And but now it's affecting comics because we're dinosaurs here. We really are dinosaurs who read either read comics or even read them on the iPad or something. Because there's no, we've discussed there's no regeneration for the media. Yeah. And at least not in the American comics or even the European ones, I think. Because looking at YouTube, how many 23, 24-year-olds do you see with a collection, maybe the quarter of what you have, or Damien, or Colin, or Earl Grey? You would think already they would have amassed a nice collection of some of this stuff, but you really don't see it, at least on YouTube. Yeah. So...
But part of that sort of makes sense though, because I try to think back of when I was 20s and when I was, because I feel like all of us who have been reading kind of comics specifically since we were younger have gone through a phase at some point where we sort of left them behind. And again, it's not a blanket statement, but I think that's
I did it. I'm trying to think
of my collection when I was 20. I don't know if my collection would have amounted to more than like a short box, you know what I mean? Or a long box or two, it's not nothing, but I don't think it was even close to what's around me now that I have to keep culling to keep the space. But so it's an interesting thought. I do hear what you're saying. I just wonder if it's just that focus on something different, right? It's always the reading versus the collecting side of it. They're reading in different ways and just not amassing the physical library, but still kind of contributing and kind of reading and stuff,
My friends, the irony, they have 2 kids and one of them is in high school. And the one who owns the comic shop, and he's been collecting comics all his life. His house is filled with comics, but his son has zero interest. In comics, even manga. He doesn't like to read. He just likes math. He's very good at math, but he doesn't like to read, which is now it's quite common now, at least in this part where I live in Texas. And even among the well-educated people, just reading for pleasure is something people do so little. And I never thought it would affect comics, but now it's affecting comics.
It's the opposite here in Portland.
You have a high literacy rate,
which may not reflect anything, but when my daughter turned, I don't know, around 9, 10, all the kids were in competition of who could read the most fat books the fastest.
Right.
I was thinking, like, when I was a kid, I was reading books that were 150 pages long. They're all reading these 500-page books that are part of a 12-book series, and they're ripping through them, and the people who can't read them fast enough feel bad. It was kind of shocking how much reading was going on here. Right. And a lot of the or number of the girls turned out, like my daughter, to be reading Webtoons, the Korean web app. So I think what will be interesting is what will people who are, from my point of view in Portland, where people are reading a lot, what will they be reading when they're 25 or 30 or whatnot? Will some of them come back to comics and look for other kinds of comics than, the Babysitter's Club and all of that stuff that they were reading on Korean web apps?
Yeah.
Both of us have daughters easily influenced into reading comics by us. Most people 100%. Don't have parents like us. But.
Well, Rasa commented on it, our chat this afternoon, the photo I took of my daughter sitting eating cereal and reading a comic, right? Like it was too good to be true to see it. I had to take a photo of it because it was just amazing. She was just so into it, and absolutely. But that's purely because of the focus of me in there and kind of pushing these things on her like a new addict, right? So you were saying before, Gore, about like the conversations at your shop. I remember going just recently into one of the shops, and when I get new books, I don't want, I never get bags and boards. I just get them as they are because I've got some and I multi-pack stuff. And I remember going into one of the shops and the guy behind the counter asking me, and a couple of the customers kind of jaw hitting the floor talking about that. Like, what do you mean you don't want a bag and board? It's like, I'm not too concerned about it. I've got bags. I put like 4 in one bag kind of thing, or I try to like cut back on stuff, and I'm trying to call doing that. And just you could see it not compute as far as like, no, hold on a second. Like, I could tell he really wanted to tell me. He didn't, to his credit, he didn't, but he really wanted to tell me how I was doing things wrong and how I needed to do things right. He didn't, and it was fine, but it was that reaction and the focus on slabbing here has been a big thing too. Luckily, though, a lot of the comic kind of guys that I do know on the Facebook groups, there's still a lot of them that are reading and talking about that too, which is really nice. So there seems to be so far still a nice balance of they're still investing and slabbing and all those things and flipping, but they are still reading, which is great. Even if they aren't liking everything they're reading, the Winnipeg Comic Addicts group especially, they kind of meet every Saturday and sell each other comics and buy stuff back and forth. And there's often conversations about, did you read this? Did you read that? As well as, did you get that 1 in 100 cover? Did you slab it? What did it come back as? So it's still a nice mix, which is good. It's not fully one way.
You know, and the other thing regarding that is among the readers, among many of them, there is this complete disinterest in the history of the comics that they like. And the example would be, I don't know how many people have been at the shop who get really excited when they get the first appearance of Elektra. And when I'm there and I'll say, hey, you like Daredevil? You like Frank Miller? Oh man, first appearance of Elektra. And then they go from there, they'll jump to the show from Netflix from a few years back. And then they'll jump to that Daredevil may appear in She-Hulk. Then they jump to Disney acquiring. So then they jump from that to the television medium, right?
Yeah.
And then when you want to discuss the comic, I go, have you read Daredevil, Miller's Daredevil? Most of them have said no. I go, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I'll say, well, when Miller took over that book, it was the early 80s, I'll say, and it was a Marvel book, and it changed the medium. It really did, because this was a comic, kind of like Taxi Driver, right? What it did for the crime.
That's a good analogy,
right? And I said this was a mainstream comic, but it was now you had stuff like the Comics Journal. Now they don't know what the Comics Journal is, but I'll say something. They'll dedicate a whole issue about the violence and all these things that Miller was doing. Yeah. And this was unheard of, really, at the time. And then about a year or two later, for DC, Alan Moore did the same thing with Swamp Thing. Now, the independent people were already doing this because, and of course, the underground and heavy metal, and all, the Europeans were already doing this sort of thing. But for a mainstream thing, and I don't over intellectualize it, and I just try to give them engaged on this, but they have no interest in this. Yeah. And then I'll see them a few months later, they still haven't read any the Frank Miller stuff. The whole idea is they got this one. They're reading the current Daredevil by was it Zdarsky who's writing it?
Zdarsky, yeah.
And they're really liking it. They think it's great. And I said, well, have you tried at least the ones from the past 20 years? Bendis, Brubaker, and all those? Yeah, we've heard of those. Hey, you have the first appearance of Echo. That she's going to be in a TV show. This is where it automatically goes. And then so but basically my point is there's a lack of interest in the history of just because I think it's just everyone here, Chris, you, and almost everyone here in the chats, we just like the stories, but we like the history. How do we get to here? How do we get to here? What did this person do, and how they change that for better or for worse, right?
Well, we need to make more videos about the history because the people making videos about key issues are making so many more videos than we are.
Yeah, one problem too is that that's fine if to me it's fine if like okay you like that and even I can be a little bit interested in it. I don't care about it because I'm just not going to take the time. But at a certain there's a like a plateau though, right? Where they all they're just all showing the same comics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's become
There's
like
about
the same 50 comics that everyone
300
has.
comics, so it's even less At this point, where there's so many channels, at this point, it's even less about the first appearance of Elektra, and it's more about whether it's a 7.5 or a 9.8.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
that's what they show, and then they show that they upgraded their 9.2.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost even more about that. Like it's really even plateaued, even if you were okay with it, because now you're just really looking at the same 200 comics, 250 comics. You know.
Yeah.
There are times where I'll feel like, does anyone want me to do a haul where I show, 15 issues of
we do.
House of Mystery that I thought I was excited to get.
Right.
There's
Yeah,
nothing
we do.
key whatsoever in those, except there's all these exciting artists and things like that. But
well, and that's the beauty of just not giving a shit, right? Like,
yeah,
not even considering, not even in like a part of my brain does it even register to contribute to anything that's happening on that side of the YouTube world.
well, unfortunately, I've
showing
watched enough
fucking
of those
weirdo
other
80s
videos.
books,
I've watched enough of those other videos that it does pass through my mind briefly.
Yeah.
Hey, this may not be very interesting to some of my new YouTube friends.
Yeah.
But what does occur to me, because I do think, maybe because I live in Portland, I do think there are young 20-somethings who want to try out comics.
Mhm.
But if they go on YouTube, they're going to feel like they're not real collectors unless they're getting
Right.
those 300 or 50 comics or whatever. that
Yeah, they
everyone
must
else
be able to
is.
make that leap. That basically, that they
And-
must have that willpower, or that,
Yeah.
or just that confidence in themselves. Okay, this doesn't matter what they think. I still want to
Right.
do it. Yeah.
I don't
Like
know,
when
man.
you talked about Constant Bromstar, he was great for encouraging, hey, here's an interesting comic I just pulled out of my collection,
Yeah.
And
And I mean,
there needs
I
to be
hear
more
what you're
people like
saying,
that.
but I hear what you're saying, but I think like the people who are truly it's going to speak to, it's going to speak to them. And I mean, I think everybody else that's getting into it, they're getting attracted through like the slabbing and all that other horse shit or whatever, right? Like, as I pull my slabs off of the shelf.
I was about to go get my
still,
3. I was going to get my 3 slabs. Like,
yeah. I think they're still getting exposed to it. So I think there's still something that's drawing them to it. But I think like naturally, the people who are going to be interested in the punk rock and the comics and whatever it is, whatever kind of niche thing it is to some degree, they're going to come to it. You know what I mean? So there's always going to be this mainstream nonsense that happens. And I mean, maybe Chris can kind of hear this in a different way, but like this idea of coming to something that's not mainstream, you're going to be drawn to like the noise bands and the comics and whatever it is naturally. And I think that those kind of groups have always been pretty small, and I don't think they're ever going to go away. So I mean, there's always going to be this mainstream push to, what the fuck are you listening to? That's nonsense. I could do that. There's always going to be this not understanding the core of any of these kind of movements or collectors or things like that, right? Like,
well, Dimebag Darrell
if that
said,
made any sense.
It did. Dimebag Darrell used to say, who's from Texas, of course, but dead. But he used to say, we're never going to be as popular as, I'm paraphrasing, but it's Blink 182, but we're just a steel bar right through the middle. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're always going to be there. We're never going to be that popular, but we're always just going to be there.
Right.
And she said something like that. So, and I think that's more or less what you're trying to say. It's a smaller community, but there's always enough that someone's going to be there.
And I think it's always been somewhat of a smaller community. The ones that are like, even in the heyday, I think it was still, when you looked at the bigger picture, it was always a bit of a smaller community, right? So I don't know if that's grown or shrunk. I have no idea, but
I guess what I'm really just trying to say, it is important to do the videos about the oddball stuff.
Hell yeah, it is.
No, I agree.
Or however you like to collect, and
you're right.
give the impression that collecting comics is done in any way you want to, and not, there's not like this rule of what you should do. And
especially if you don't have your eye on the sub number.
And if you're an oddball punk rocker,
that's actually very important. That's right.
Everybody has a.
I'm sorry, Damien.
Everybody has a moment where they discover punk rock, right? You have to discover it to know it exists.
Yeah.
For me, there was definitely like a moment where, no one was talking about this, and then suddenly someone did in punk rock.
Right.
And then I was able to go from there.
I think with YouTube is there's an unhealthy aspect of it. I've noticed it. I'm subscribed to some of these channels. I think they're interesting, but regarding Chris's point, if they are focused on subscribers, if they are focused on monetization, if this is some kind of of therapy for them, and mental therapy, right? YouTube, which can be dangerous because if it doesn't satisfy you or help you in the way you hope it does, if you have all these expectations, which I think I can speak here, none of us have those expectations here. I don't think we started this conversation on YouTube for subs, for mental therapy, for something else. Now it may serve that function, but there's some people that I watch and I just like their videos because I think this is holding them by a thread, because it wouldn't surprise me if, a few months from now, a year, someone, something terrible happens, and we've heard that from fellow YouTubers, something was happened to them, right? And, but this thing, because I watch them and they'll be frustrated because they're not getting this, they're not getting those views and those type of things. And I'm thinking, well, you join YouTube with maybe unreasonable expectations in some ways, and you're going to get hurt in a way unless you focus or just step back and think about why you're doing this. Yeah, anyway, what Chris said made me think of that. So.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of people that say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Say that there are a lot of people that say that this community brought them out of depression and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that ties though to their focus on building their channel. But you certainly can't talk about your favorite band is Destiny or something like that and get a lot of subs here. So
yeah.
No,
but I think Damien touches on something that's very important that I maybe overlooked, but I think that's kind of key. Like the fact is we are out there making these videos. So if they're going to stumble on one of our videos at some point and they're going to stumble on it because it'll show up in their sidebar and you like comics. So here's some other ones and it'll be one of our faces on the screen talking about some whatever nonsense we're talking about. So I think that's important to have that kind of filtered into the infamous algorithm of YouTube, right? So just to kind of that gateway, I think is important for sure.
That's actually why I started in my descriptions, I started putting the name of every book that I talk about, right? Because that makes it searchable. It takes a long time because I'm doing it on my phone, but I did it for that. And partly too, because sometimes I want to remember what the hell I said about something. Or sometimes I remember you guys say something, I go, well, I'll never find it. Because it's Sunday Chat 13 or you know what I mean? Like I'll never remember it.
Yeah.
Except when Ragamuffin used to, was it Ragamuffin?
Do the timestamps.
The timestamps.
Oh yeah, the timestamps are good.
That was really handy.
I was thinking I might as well just do timestamps. I might as well just do timestamps, but I just want it to be searchable and then I'll find it on my own. But
yeah. I mean, it also helps having that stuff listed so you get a quick snapshot of what you're talking about, It's kind of nice even as a viewer to see that little snapshot of what's coming up,
Oh yeah, I have this guilt that someone is going to just watch my video to be nice. And like I just talk about X-Men or something. You know what I mean? I like for whatever reason I just want people like you. If I talk about X-Men, Terrence, I want you to know that this is an X-Men video.
Yeah,
so I don't want you to like waste. I actually think that in my head. Like I don't want someone that doesn't give a shit to watch this. Like because I also know that I'll hit. You know what I mean? I know that I hit a lot of like corners, right? Like I have to go visit the community. Do you know what I mean? The certain community that likes X-Men, or the certain community that's more indie, or me and Damien are probably more centered like that in that hit a lot of it, but yeah, I actually feel bad about that. That's another reason why I put that picture up of what I talk about.
Right. Well, I appreciate you thinking of me in that way. That's fantastic.
among others.
Yeah, thank you very much. No,
but
just
I think it's go ahead, Gore.
It's just basically going back to Damien and Terrence. You guys from the very beginning of your channels, you discussed a huge variety of comics, basically like Chris. and it made it possible. People were like, I think, because the way you approach comics, it wasn't just the mainstream comics. You appreciated them. You didn't look down on them. And then you had the stuff that was not popular, the independent stuff, the underground stuff. And the way you discussed them made it extremely engaging, where someone could jump in. They would watch one from Terrence or one from you, Damien. And then the way you would respond in the chats to us was just very welcoming and, again, engaging, right? And Chris does the same, the way he touches on all these things. But so I guess, I mean, you're both right in the sense that by us making, or you guys making these videos, is that someone's going to stumble across it and say, there's a place for me here, I suppose.
Mhm.
And but that's the credit of the two of you. I mean, I know it's your anniversary, Terrence, but Damien as well here, and
Damien before
now,
me, absolutely.
Yeah, and now with Chris. I mean, Chris, you're right. He has his X-Men. He reads every X-Men book.
It's so good. It's so fun.
Constantly, right? And
Well, Star Wars too, Gore. Don't forget, I read every Star Wars book also.
And yeah.
Which one is more masochistic?
It's Star Wars, right? And then he'll read, something.
Spawn, Damien.
His Lady
Spawn.
Death will come in, his Spawn will come in, and this disdain for the '80s comics. Well, not disdain, but he goes, they're not that great. But he likes his '90s comics, like his Ghost Rider and stuff. So, I guess, yeah. So people like Chris, we just don't see that many of them around basically anymore. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot less than what it was for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot less. It's a lot less. Yeah, okay.
And I mean, one of the things that I love, like it still happens to me. The other week, I was searching for Caliber Comics videos, and there was a couple of guys that I'd never heard of before that were talking about some of their Caliber Comics favorites. So it's nice for me, who loves those rabbit holes of the two people. There's two videos of somebody talking about some obscure shit like that. I live for that stuff. Like that's so much fun to kind of find this thread, which is why, again, a huge shout out to Russ Works. I think Russ Works, especially in the
Russ
comments,
is
unbelievable stuff, right? So it's always amazing to have part of the kind of bonus of doing these videos is have people commenting on your videos that are a million times smarter than I am and more knowledgeable to kind of put some of these points together, right? And kind of send you down a path, which is phenomenal. So you end up drawing some people close to you, hopefully, that are going to contribute in another way.
Yeah, Russ's comments or Gore's comments always make my day.
Well, that's kind of, I think Russ is another league. And if Russ is still here, Russ, did you ever finally read the final Modesty Blaze story? Years ago, he said he didn't want to read it. I mean, I like Modesty Blaze, but he's a much bigger fan than I am. But there's a final story which deals with the fate of Modesty and Willie. But he said he couldn't make himself to read it.
Right,
and I wonder
right.
if he did. Anyway, so we can continue. But if he's here, if he finally read it, and I mean, I've read it, and it's I won't say anything.
From what I understand from Colin, Russ was also one of those guys that was on the Fantagraphics message boards as well back in the day.
Oh wow!
From what he was telling me, so yeah, he has a long history in kind of
he knows
comics conversation.
Yeah, he knows a lot.
Yeah.
Chris, when you started, did you feel like you were one of the weirdos, or did you feel like you were in the mainstream? And then
no, I was going to show
you were one of us.
No. I started this channel to show vinyl and show music.
Uh-huh.
And I thought I was going to just show some comics and books too, but I thought I was going to mostly show vinyl. And then I found, I don't even know who I found. Yeah. If you look at my first video, the first 2 or 3 videos are all vinyl.
Huh.
And yeah. And the name of my channel was different.
You did comics halls with or something.
Yeah, so I've done a sports podcast with that friend turned into a crazy Trump guy and stopped talking to me. But I mean, it's sad because I've known him for like 15 years. But
yeah,
but we would do. Yeah, so you could find him too. So yeah, I would do those hauls with him. But we had done a sports podcast for a long, long time, me and him. And in fact, that's why the name of my changed my channel to Chaos Comics, because the name of the podcast was Chaotic Sports. and yeah, he would be on too. But he wasn't a big comics fan. But I mean, he was a big like in the culture, you know. Like I mean, he was born in the '90s, so you know he was I mean, and I am too, to be honest. Like a product of a lot of all the stuff that happened in the '80s. You know, the X-Men cartoon was in the '90s. A product of all of that, you know, the Blade movie, things like that, you know.
Right.
So he knew about it like most '90s kids do, you know what I mean? But it wasn't exactly through reading thousands of comics. But yeah. So when I don't even know who, somehow I got attached and realized there was a community and started doing more comics, you know, and then I found you, Damien, pretty early on, and then I feel like I found Terrence pretty late. I think one time on Twitter, I made a comment about Merzbow or something,
Mm-hmm.
and then he tagged you, right? And then at that time you weren't doing that many videos,
Yes,
Terrence.
yes, because when you mentioned Merzbow, I immediately thought of Terrence, and that
Yeah.
Right.
I must have tagged you in.
Yeah, you tagged him, was like, oh, this guy's great, but like at that time you weren't like back on. I think you were like taking a break because you had like 6 noise videos in a row, and then you had like some
Right.
comic video like 9 months or something like that. But your Twitter was still talking about comics. I remember,
Yep.
but
Because
Yeah.
Terrence was literally the only person in my entire 60 years that I heard mention Merzbow. So when
Right.
you mentioned it, I was like, oh my God, it actually isn't just his personal
there's 2 of
obsession.
them.
there's 2 of them. Neither is Japanese.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's good shit, man. I still love it.
Yeah,
I have
Um,
no idea who they are.
Merzbow
he's
is a noise.
Yeah, he's a noise legend, honestly. He's been doing music, experimental music since like the late 60s, doing like tape manipulation and cut up and collage kind of thing. And then he moved into pure electronics and noise, like kind of like white noise, I guess, like really dense. But he's gone through a
Wall of
bunch of different
noise.
eras where he's unbelievable. He's really, I've seen him twice live. The first
Oh,
time
you've
I
seen him
saw
live.
I have twice. He came
Oh,
to
that's
Winnipeg.
awesome.
He came to Winnipeg 3 times, but I only saw 2 of them. The
Oh,
first
wow.
time I was fucking shit faced, and I was inside the kind of penned off area where you could drink, and he was on the outside, and I must look like a madman as I went to the fence and like, you were amazing, oh my god, and just yelling at him some stupid shit, whatever I was saying. But
Probably couldn't understand you.
he could not. He just smiled very politely and said thank you very much, and went into his car and drove away, kind of thing.
Oh, that was not at the show. That was just where you saw him.
It was
Oh,
just
he
it was
out
after
there.
the show, just
Outside
after
the
the
show.
show. So
Oh.
his the kind of person that was taking care of him and driving around just kind of took him away.
Yeah.
Gore, did you see Russ's comment here? He was asking about did you get the Louis Garcia book yet?
Yes, I did, and eventually I'll have to make a video. Yeah, he had mentioned that Luis Garcia. He worked for the Warren magazines, and I finally did get the book. And it's it's a very pretty book, and eventually I have to do a video. But he had mentioned it, and I had ordered it that week. Then I finally got it in.
Nice.
I have a book question for you, Gore. What do you have all the Love and Rockets, right? You've read them all?
No, I'm not Earl Grey. Earl Grey has the best collection of Love and Rockets I've ever.
Well,
He really
Colin
does.
has them all too. Colin has them all too, I think. But
Yeah.
what Colin was thinking about buying, I was like, why would you buy? You not only have you read it, you own them all, right? So,
I'm about nice having a different format though, right? Like having
well, I
This is
definitely, but
No, this is why, because whenever I read something like Love and Rockets, I reread the story of Isabel. We meet her in the first issue or 2 of Love and Rockets. She's got serious problems, mental problems,
oh yeah, he does.
and but she's like a mentor to Hopi and Maggie. And supposedly something happened to her when she went to Mexico, and so you have these flashbacks when she was okay. She dressed nice hair, nice family, but at one point she had a family, and in the panels we show she had an abortion. She travels to Mexico. She's running away from something or someone or her conscience or something. She meets a man who treats her well, and he's got a son. son adores her, and she thinks she can make this work. She thinks she can, but she keeps having these visions, and she just says, I can't, I have to leave. And she leaves him. And the way the Love and Rockets works is you have the present and the past. And then you'll see her something, she's down in her 50s. She's standing in a room naked. And she's a broken woman in many ways. So when I reread stuff like that, even though I have the singles, when I hear, they're coming out with something, it inspires me, but it just reinvigorates everything. Even though I have it right here, right? Yeah. I got to get that, because those stories just so resonate so well with me. And it's not just with Love and Rockets. It could be, like I've been reading The Phantom, for example, right? And I read a wonderful story this morning of The Phantom where he proposes to Diana. And this was the Falk story, the one from the 30s and the 40s. And the way it was done is it was during the Second World War, and the Phantom was fighting the Japanese. And Diana thinks he might get hurt, so she signals to him that the Japanese are coming, and she gets shot. The Phantom doesn't know, though, until he finds out. He goes to the bed, and that's where he proposes to her. He wants to marry her, and she says she agrees, but then she realizes she can't walk. And she begins to think about this, and she's going to be a burden to him when they go back to the jungle. And so when he comes back the next day, she says, I can't marry you. And he doesn't know why. And he says, I'm in love with somebody else, because there was a recurring character that was in love with her, and she thought she was in love with him, named Byron. And so, but she lies, and he believes her, and he goes away. So, I mean, it resonates quite well with the war story. She risked her life for him. And then she lies because she thinks that there's something wrong with her and it's going to affect him. So she lies about it. And so stuff like that, make me want to, I mean, I have it in the Australian publications, but if I find a collected edition, which I'm sure there are, I'll get it as well, because it just resonates with me. I guess it's a long way of answering your question, is why I need those. And that's why I want to get the box set of Love and Rockets, is because it's wonderfully painful. And for me, wonderfully painful works. And one final note on the Phantom. The Phantom stories, the way it works is the male heir takes over. And the Phantom goes back like 500 years. And he's considered the ghost who walks, who's immortal, right? And they're not immortal, but basically the son takes over. But the way it works is the Phantom meets someone, marries them, and they have children. And if it's a boy, he'll become the Phantom. Around age 10, though, that boy is sent to the mother's home country to be raised. So if he marries someone from Spain, he gets sent to Spain. Norway, the US. And he's raised there, or he goes to a boarding school. And the thing is, though, he will not come back until he gets word that his father is dead or is mortally wounded. And so the mother says goodbye to her son, knowing that the next time she sees him is when she has to give him the news, your father's dead and you have to take over, or he's mortally wounded. And as I was reading, over the years of reading these Phantom stories, it's not in your face how they do it, but when you think about it, you're thinking, God, this is pretty awful. And the son takes the duty that what he must do to follow the tradition of his father, the legacy of his father. And
Interesting. So Damien and I spoke about this. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. You go.
Damien and I spoke about this already, but I'm curious to ask both of you, Chris and Gore. Gore, you've often asked me, we've often talked about like the importance of stories, and I talked about the importance of art in my life, I think. So I'd be curious, for number one, because I love hearing you talk about stuff, Gore, so please continue. But also just curious what your answer to that question is. Why are these stories, especially when you're talking about these things, not necessarily in the view of like kind of having it again to revisit it. But what is it about those stories that kind of keeps you on the hunt and keeps you searching for these things?
I mean, Chris, you want to? Or?
No, you go first, and then I'll have the far worst sounding answer afterwards after following you.
No, I think art is like faith, right? I mean, when you're little and you go to confession. In my case, I had to confess that I was reading heavy metal magazine, and I was in school. So on Fridays, made confession odd, and I was an altar boy from Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. mass, because I would get dropped off quite early, and so I was the only kid there. And the nun says, "You're here, you're serving mass." And but in a way, faith in something, right, that's beyond you, outside of you. It helps explain things. It helps deal with things when you are unable to do it, or you need some kind of help to do it, right? But at one point, faith only goes so far, or it gets replaced, or you don't have it anymore. And I think when you look at, for example, at a painting or something, or you hear a story, or you hear a song, it serves a function, some kind of function in the brain, even if it's a tragedy, especially if it's a tragedy or a drama. Mm-hmm. And it's done in a realistic way, in a way where that's the way it had to be. That's the way it had to end. And you go through all these human emotions, which is basically human history, and it resonates with you in a way that I don't say the word inspires, but it does something to you. And also, regarding me, for example, Dr. Zhivago. I first read Dr. Zhivago when someone I loved was in a lot of pain, and I would go visit her in the hospital. This went on for about a month. And I would look over at the bay and read Zhivago. Now, in the Zhivago story, you have Zhivago, he's separated from Laura. And though he'll be separated from Laura, for chapters, almost like Cerebus, when Cerebus is separated from Jaka. But you keep thinking, when is she going to come back? But she's always on his mind. And of course, the story, like the film, although it's a little bit different in the book, it's got a very tragic ending, but you walk away with the spirit of these people who never gave up, and their deep humanity and the horror of what happened with the Russian Revolution, what happened after the Russian Revolution, and what they struggled for, and the love they had for each other. And it resonates because we know good people. We know that sometimes we do things, or the world is the way it is, but why do you keep doing things? It's because there's good people out there who, no matter what happens to them, are not resentful, they're not bitter, they're not evil, or they maybe had a reason to maybe cross that threshold. And something about art always reinforces that in me. And but in a way, it replaced faith, and that's why the stories just constantly. I mean, I can walk, Paris, Texas, over and over again, or Wings of Desire over and over again, or See Them Up Paradiso right. Over and over again, right? Or I read a poem, or like one of the Love and Rocket stories, right? And it just, so it just does something in you that fills that, and allows you just to continue. I mean, just to continue in a way that's very positive and just resonates, or even listen to a song as depressing as Joy Division's, Love Will Tear You Apart, and so why do you listen to this over and over again? And because the song works, somehow it works. So anyway,
so aside from songs, I rarely reread things. Occasionally, this year is probably more than ever. And I'm glad you made I'm glad in the middle. I'm not glad because you could think how you want, but in the middle, at first when you said it's like faith, I was gonna go, well, I'm gonna start with mine as being the complete opposite of faith. But you amended it in the middle, right? Because to me, like when I'm reading art, it's sort of like actually lets me understand why we call them humanities. You know what I mean? Because you find like that human element in almost anything you read. Like it's almost, I just read this book, which is about AI that I loved on Twitter already. Right.
Uh-huh.
But even that, the truth is that it's not hard. If it was hard sci-fi, it would start getting very mathy and logical, but it's actually very human. These immortal AIs that are walking around, for hundreds of years, watching humanity fall apart and rebuild and fall apart and stuff, and so for me, art is really to get to that like kernel of human nature. And I haven't really read something that is purely logical that is also good. I think of like stuff that pretends to be that way. I don't know if you guys have ever read Flatland, right? But really that's superhuman too, honestly, right? And another piece of it is, this just might be the way I am, but I think even though like a lot of the stuff I read that seems completely different from each other, whether it's like an X-Men comic compared to Merzbow or whatever, or or even within comics, like reading indie comics or reading like Fantagraphic stuff, reading superhero stuff, like to me they all inform each other. They're all part of the same like humanity sphere, right? Or you can make that sphere smaller and call it just comics. You could just call it art in general.
Mm-hmm.
And an important part of to me is when I'm reading or listening or looking at art, or in the form of comics, reading and looking at art, right, is how much it makes me understand that entire sphere. And then I've gotten a little bit older, but I used to really not be a jerk about it, but I used to really point it out that some people are very narrow. And now I don't care as much, because now I just sort of go to their part of the sphere is the way I sort of think about it.
Right.
Yeah, and like I'll go there. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's sort of like when a comedian knows he can't tell his really dirty jokes in front of the late night audience. Do you know what I mean? Like he goes, it's his responsibility to like know the audience or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I guess that's sort of the way I see it. I see it this big, like sphere of humanity, right? And like how you find that, like that little kernel that adds to it overall. And that's my long answer. So
That's fantastic.
The Russ is here. When you combine, for example, the printed word, right? The printed word, and then what it does to the brain when you read it. Jared Osborne has been discussing the graphic novel of The Great Gatsby a lot, right? He loves that book.
Mm-hmm.
He's collecting basically everything on Gatsby. And when you read Gatsby, there's a pacing to the wording that hits you emotionally and intellectually, right? There's a Peter O'Donnell. I think Russ I know agrees with me, is the novels, and I think what I was discussing with Terrence, are just fantastic. And there's one element in one of the stories where Willie Modesty is badly hurt, and they're out in some desert, and they find some shelter, but they're being pursued. But again, Modesty is in bad shape, and the person who's pursuing him is a man who had beaten Willie when he was younger to a pulp, and so Willie psychologically doesn't think he could defeat him. So they think they're safe, but the man and his people come. And so Modesty is, again, she's delirious, she's in bad shape, and he keeps her in this shelter. And Willie goes out to confront the man, but the man doesn't know that Modesty's there, because if he knows, he'll kill her as well after he kills Willie. So Willie and him get into this fight, huge fight, and Willie's just getting clobbered, right? But if he dies, Modesty's going to starve. She's going to die, dehydration and other injuries. But he's fighting, right? But he can't win this. Modesty is aware of what Willie's doing. So what does Modesty do? Modesty crawls out into the open where she can be seen. And at first Willie says, "What are you doing?" But now he realizes what he's doing. Because now This man is aware that Modesty's there. After he kills Willie, he's going to go after her. So Modesty knew this. Modesty knows that Willie's going to get killed and she's going to die, but she doesn't want Willie to die. But what's the one thing that'll just take Willie, that psychological, that leap, is now he's fighting for her directly. And that's exactly what he does. And he takes on that guy and he takes him down. You know, and the way Peter O'Donnell executed that with his writing, which is just absolutely excellent how he does this. It just, you're engaged and you get emotional because you know exactly what she's doing when he does that. He doesn't explain it. He doesn't have to explain it. The reader gets it, you know, and it does something. It moves you. And I guess, again, back to the art, what art can do that. It can just resonate that.
Yeah.
And Neil Gaiman's arc of The Game of You, for example. In The Game of You, you have the story of Barbie, who's associating with people not in her class. Those of you who read that story arc, she's associating with people who are transgender, who are lesbian, and who are working class. And that's not Barbie's environment. But you see it from her point of view, and then you see how they see her. And it's a very moving story, in fact, how it ends. Those final panels of Barbie when she says goodbye to us. I mean, I just find them extremely moving, given the history of those 6 issues of that beautifully executed work. But Neil's really good when it comes to humanity. He's really great with empathy, and he does it in a way that it doesn't overdo it. The reader gets it without him having to explain it, and you feel for them. And so, you know, I return to that story quite often because it's just so well done. And but anyway, it made me think of that Modesty Places scene from one of the novels.
Kind of on a different topic, but on the topic that you're getting at about what does comics and art do to us. I think what I had said earlier kind of lines up a bit with Chris's way of viewing it. But as I was thinking, there's another aspect to it of comics and the art itself. Like we get all excited when we find Alex Nino, or we get all excited when we find some other Barry Windsor Smith, or I get excited these days over Brandon Graham's artwork. And I feel like as a comic book, and I don't think this, well, I have no idea if this is true for everybody else, but as a comic book fan, for me, when I'm reading Alex Nino, in my head, I'm kind of drawing like Alex Nino. I'm an amateur artist. And when I experience artists that I like, for a moment in my brain, I'm being that artist kind of. So I get to be all these different artists with all these different cool styles. And that's why I get excited when I find a Corbin book or a Nino book or whatever. And I feel like I hear that in your voice when you describe the cool books you find, Terrence. But I don't know if everyone experiences that. But
no, I agree with you.
That seems to be like an extra addition to being a comic book fan. You're an art aficionado, and in some way, on some level, you experience the art. And I almost occasionally feel sorry for the creators who are so busy doing their own art, they can't experience as much art as we can.
Yeah.
Right. Because they're tied into
about, Beto not buying, only buying comics occasionally, because they have to focus on their own art most of the time.
Right. The question in the chat was, how is it that you define resonance? Just to something that, for me personally, like something that moves me in some way. There's some sort of truth that's told, or I often refer to it as like this magic that happens where there's some sort of combination of words and pictures or ideas or characterizations or whatever it is that just either directly resonates to something that I've maybe experienced in my life, but sometimes something that I haven't experienced, but you can tell like it's this truth, like Gore was saying, like people were saying already, this kind of truth that's getting represented. So there's a resonance with, you can just kind of feel it. I mean, for me anyway, I can kind of feel it. And even listening to Gore talk about kind of what he was talking about there, like there's a resonance even there as well. So I mean, it can play in a whole bunch of different ways. Just somebody sharing their views and experiences that just hit you in some way, whether that's a dramatically emotional way or even a comedic sense. What do you guys think about that, about resonance?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as you get, you almost start to resonate more with certain creators and artists, and then you enjoy their work more over time in a way. I don't know, which is sometimes like Gore and I think have talked about rereading books, you know, certain books that sometimes for me anyway, they resonate even more. I keep rereading 100 Years of Solitude. I can't really explain why, but I've been rereading it most of my life because that one resonates so much with me.
That's so funny that that's a book you reread. That's always been my book that I told myself that I was going to read in Spanish.
I'm told
I got
it's
better at
fantastic
it
in Spanish, but I've never read it that way.
Yeah.
Oh, our
so
leader is gone.
Oh, he's in audio only.
I guess StreamYard is different now.
here,
If you're in audio only, it doesn't even show a symbol for you or something. Confusing.
One thing about comics, which is, I think
I have to hop off just for a minute, guys, but I'll come back on in a minute.
Sure.
Sorry.
with comics is that, again, back to the films, right? When when people are at the comic shop, they just want to talk about the comic films, but they won't read the comic themselves, right? And I remember when, like, with the Avengers, right? And they all love Thanos. They love Thanos. They were nuts with Thanos. And when I told them, I thought the movie was okay, but it didn't really do much for me. But I said it's not a bad film. I think it works quite well. But and then at the comic shop, pulled out a Warlock comic, right, by Jim Starlin, and I showed them the problem is, and I showed them the panels, right? There was one or two customers that were there, and I showed them the panels, and I said, "This is the problem I have, because I see these panels here, and I can just stare at them. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful. The coloring, the inking. The film can't do that. And when you watch a film, you can't pause it continuously and stare at a scene. It doesn't work that way in a film. A film has a different aesthetic movement, the way it works. And the comic has its own. And part of that is you see these panels, which is basically what Damien's point is, what the artwork does, the artist that you like, what he or she does, and you just look at them and you study them, right? And there are, with Cerebus, what Gerhard and Dave Sim were doing, particularly with Jaka's story, one I often return to. I mean, there's some beautiful pages in that thing. And no matter how well they were to make an animated series or a film or whatever, it's a whole different experience.
Yeah,
and for
100%.
those of us who understand that about the medium and like that, that's the reason we like the medium. Something that hasn't changed since we were kids, but now we understand it, why we like it better. It goes back to that. We like films, we like books, we like music, we like poetry, and we like the comics. But that's it. It's those panels. But I'm not gonna pause Star Wars, for Star Wars. Look at that. Look at that. It doesn't work that way. But if I look at a comic drawn by Al Williamson of the comic adaptation of Star Wars, you pause at those things going, wow, how do you do that? And it provokes something in you. It does something to you. So.
Yeah, or even just sitting and soaking up a page, right? Like we talk about the panel to panel experience, but there's also seeing the pages and seeing what's coming in the future and where you are and being able to move through time at your own pace and all of that stuff. Yeah. Interesting.
I was just thinking, I mean, I think about this stuff too much, about how an important part of having a comic book is flipping through it before I read it. I'm just experiencing it in a different way. I might even, right now I'm going backwards through it. Like I started near the back, but there's just something about sort of the images flashing by. It gets my brain maybe starting to resonate more with that particular comic book. which I can't do with a movie, right? I can't like flip through the movie and then start at the beginning. I mean, I suppose I could if I really worked hard at it, but it's not a natural behavior. But the whole, my whole life I've been flipping through comics before I read them, and that seems to be important somehow.
And there's this fascination also with just this line, like I was talking about this horse, and you know, the simplicity of line to create a visual, you know, that this idea of whatever your voice is that's coming through your pen, that's one continuous line or a bunch of cross-hatching lines or something that's really detailed, showing like a dog in every panel or a lizard in Darrow's kind of voice, Darrow. I guess. You know what I mean? Like there's all of this stuff that also adds to it, this other form of communication, and the simplicity of even going to Scott McCloud and breaking it down even further, this simplicity of like what makes up a face and how you communicate. You can communicate some complex ideas just within a single panel. You know, you can communicate so much by just even the way the characters look and the expressions and things like that, right? Where, I mean, similar within movies, obviously, but there's something more personal about somebody has drawn that face and made that expression, you know, as opposed to it also being the character as well.
Right. At least for those of us who connect with the whole idea of visual drawings as opposed to, I mean, I know some people who just read books for just the story and they don't even notice the language.
Right.
And I care about the language in a book, and in a comic book, I care about both the language and the language of the lines, as you're saying, or the language of the art, which again, for me, connects to the different humans making different books. And, you know, Jeff Darrow is a wonderful version of that, right? No one else could be like Jeff Darrow, and you get Jeff Darrow so much from his work.
Yeah, which is why those singular voices kind of resonate a little more, right? These people that, you know, while reference is always fine and you can't go without it within your kind of creative sphere or whatever, finding that singular voice, you know, for me, Peter Bagge was that singular voice growing up in the 90s, where it's this, there's really nobody else. He's drawing from other things for sure, but it's still this very singular, this is my communication to you directly in that case, I guess. So, yeah.
I guess because I came across Peter Bagge at the wrong time, I never thought about that, but you're totally right. I mean, no one else looked like that. You could see what he was drawing on, perhaps, but he did have a singular look.
Yeah, remember the stoicism of the Lone Wolf and Cub, right? Where you have the father, he's about, you know, he's going to something very adverse, and his son, his 3-year-old son, is watching him. But there's a stoicism in the little boy throughout, and maybe you could find a really. I know that they've made films of this. I've never seen any of them, but the way the little boy's drawn, and you see that, and when his father is engaged in something rather dangerous, and the little boy doesn't want to make it worse for his father. I mean, he just perseveres, and he's got that little look that and so he doesn't cry, although he wants to cry. And it's just absolutely beautiful how it's done in those little, in those panels and in those pages, and which are not cluttered. The Lone Wolf comics are not cluttered. They're just everything that's there is there for a reason. Everything, there's nothing else there that is unnecessary in those issues.
It's interesting because that immediately makes me think of why, you know, that style of illustration resonates so much with me in that kind of way of, yes, all the complex stuff is fantastic and seeing that ability, but dude, like when you really whittle down at your craft, if you can start it like a Darrow and end up where you're just doing the most basic, like 3 or 4 lines and getting the same kind of response, like that is the scope of that and the range of that is just incredible to think of kind of that journey for an artist if they choose some arc like that, right? Where, I don't know, there's just something absolutely gorgeous about that 5 lines that are making up an image that is just kind of, it almost feels at times, it feels like the height of the art, even though that's not always the case, but it really tends to feel like that sometimes. The height of the possible. You've done the most minimal work, but holy shit, have you expressed a lot, you know, that I see that entire world of all of those details and the pieces of garbage and the piece of paper and all of those things, right? Like, you just kind of make those jumps, you know? Yeah.
Well, it seems like a lot of the stuff Gore talks about is artists that do that, that have whittled it down to their essentials. All I can think of is Crapex, but I know you've talked about other ones too as I think about it.
Yeah.
No, Crapex is good, but Terry Moore, Strangers in
Terry
Paradise,
Moore,
is
that's
very
another good example. Yeah.
We mentioned Love and Rockets, you know,
Right.
especially Jaime Hernandez.
Yeah.
And Jaime is just really good with it. And actually, well, all of them are really, the guys are just really good at what they do. And to some degree, the Laphams when Stray Bullets, however they do it. Mobius, of course.
Yeah,
Mobius.
of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mobius kind of played with sometimes purposefully going as minimal as possible.
And I think the other extreme would be, but then it's more of the coloring, you know, with Corbin is how you use the colors to make it seem like it's jumping out of the page, which is like Rangerox, you know, right here, you know.
Yeah.
Liberatory, right?
Yeah.
You know, how he makes those pages just the coloring, right? How he just made them pop. And, you know, and I mean, I always return to Rangerox, and I mean, I don't know how you resonate. Well, I think
I've read very little. Yeah,
but those colors that he uses are just, God, it's just insane. You know, it's beautiful, absolutely just beautiful. So.
Cyan mentioning that clutter can also be intentional and create an resonance.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
totally true. But I would argue that a lot of the people who do that well have burned things down to the basics and then added the clutter. Like, even if you look at Corbin, he can get a very simple expression on a face of his character through just a few lines, and then he'll add all the cool stuff he does with color. And I think that Darrow gets to the essence of the movement in every panel along and then adds clutter all around it. And that might be why his stuff works. I was just reading, it's a lot of fun, but there's this new comic out called Agent of World, and the artist in that does Darrow kind of, but the images don't read as well as Darrow. He does a Darrow-like thing, but the images don't read as well. And I think it's because he doesn't have a vision in his brain that has simplified down what's going on in the panel before he adds the clutter. He'll get there, I think, if he keeps working at it.
Right. All of this kind of reminds me of kind of what Chris was saying, this importance of going towards the person to kind of explore and understand their voice. Something that you said, Damien, and I'm blanking on it already, but something kind of triggered that thought of this importance of however they're choosing to communicate, going towards it to kind of try to understand what they're saying. So going from that complexity, to the simplicity and starting to kind of understand their language. It's pronounced Sean is what Sean is saying there, not Cyan.
I've never seen it spelled that way, so I didn't know how.
Yeah. No, for sure. Me neither. Yeah.
Sorry
but
about
I think that's an important part of it too, right? This any sort of engagement with art, going towards it to try to understand the voice, as opposed to, and then that's, I guess, what's part of the big frustration with kind of what would be considered kind of the comics gate crowd or whatever it is. There seems to be this kind of rampant idea that no, you have to talk to me in a language that I understand. You can't talk to me about something in a different language. You need to speak my language for me to want to engage with that, right? And it's a really kind of depressing kind of side effect of how we
it's
communicate.
more about you. It's basically,
exactly.
but that unfortunately, that's something which is, you know, quite pervasive now, right? I mean, how many times I've heard someone say, it could be a novel or a comic, and they say, I didn't sympathize with any of the characters,
Right.
or it you make it everything about them,
Yeah.
and which I've always thought was just very unusual. I just thought it was a very odd way to approach any kind of art, really. But it seems to be much more common, and um, I mean, what do I have in common with Tarzan but Burroughs? Nothing. Absolutely
Yeah.
nothing.
Well, I mean,
You
we've
know?
never seen you in a loincloth, so that might
Never,
be.
we haven't reached that stage in our relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
But stuff like that. What do I have in common with Modesty Blaze?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
What do I have in common with any of these things? I mean, the two books that made me a serious reader was when I was
No worries,
Oh,
Chris. Sorry
okay.
to interrupt you there, Gore Vidal. No worries.
Yeah, bye, Chris. Was Hamlet and Wuthering Heights when I was in high school. And I mean, what do I have in common with some prince from Denmark, written by Shakespeare, an English guy, and Wuthering Heights, written by a woman, in the 19th century. But Heathcliff and Catherine resonated, Hamlet resonated. And so, but something about those stories did resonate with me.
Mm-hmm.
And it has nothing to do with, maybe I understand the human aspect of it. I mean, what is it that's the old Greek motto that if you understand yourself, you understand everyone, something like that.
Right, right.
And so, and there's nothing foreign if it's human. I mean, that's why there's no such thing that's weird. If it's done by a human being, it can't be weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but just that idea of just that, where like you could be the Comicsgate people, or the other group of people who are the ones that they criticize, like I said, quote unquote SJW ones.
Mm-hmm.
I can't identify with this because it's not about me. It's not about my experience.
Right.
And I'm thinking, but so yeah, it's just very frustrating.
I think that's crucial, honestly. Like, I think that's a big part of it. And especially engaging with art in whatever form it takes. You need to let those guards down. You need to, again, it still might get you to a place where it's like, nah, that didn't speak to me. And that's completely valid. But I mean, approaching it, you do need to let that gate down, right? Like, you do need to let those blockades down, I guess, and kind of engage with it in a kind of pure level. This is unbelievable how this conversation has gone, but it's amazing. But it's true though. Like, I think that's almost becomes telling of a human being, right? Like, these characters didn't resonate to you. So how do you approach your world in a day-to-day if you can't identify with fictional characters that are going through, supposedly like made up trauma and things? How are you engaging with your neighbor and people down the road and all of those things, right? Like, it kind of leads to a bigger thing, and you can almost like look at someone skeptically when they say that they don't like art. It's like, all right, what's wrong with you then? There's got to be something wrong with you, because if you can't put yourself in that space, it feels like that might be a telling. And again, not to blanket statement anywhere, but it feels like that could be a telling trait of somebody, right? So
yeah, I mean, the inability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. I mean, I read the memoir. Is it Himmler, or one of the guys, one of the men who was in charge of Auschwitz, and what they did, it took when he was in prison, and some of his sayings, and he just, he was a man who believed what he did was right. I mean, the final solution and such. And you read it, I mean, and obviously I have nothing in common with this man and his views, his background, his ethnicity, nothing. However, as I read it, I understand what he's trying to say. I understand the way he looked at Jewish people, right? And I mean, that's exactly it, and where you just read this point of view of someone that's, you know, this is so foreign to you. And back to Neil Gaiman's The Game of You, right? You know, Neil's a straight man from England writing about a woman, Barbie, an American woman, transgender character, gay and lesbian character, in a way that's just very realistic.
Yeah.
And you see it from their point of view, and you see it from Neil's point of view, and it works. And that's, in the end, an artist can do that fundamentally well. And you don't have to be. You just have a strong imagination and put yourself in someone else's shoes. The example was, I was watching one YouTuber I subscribed to. Her name is she's from Denmark, I believe. It's not Silja. She's from Norway, but she's a German woman, and she's also a writer. And she was discussing, there was some controversy about some woman who I think who was white, who wrote a book from the point of view of a black woman or something. And which, you know, I didn't know was a problem. But in any event, this became on YouTube. I forget what it was. So they were going back and forth. And so, as you know, she was reasonable about it. She was just addressing the issue. And I commented on her page. I said, okay, I'm an American of Mexican descent. My family were immigrants, but I was born here. I have some understanding of the immigrant experience, legal and not legal. I live 2 hours away from the border, okay? Mexican border. I write a memoir about my life story, my mother's life story, my family's life story. And okay, I do it. She writes a fictional account of my life. Not knowing who I am, but she writes a very similar one. We both send it to the editor, I mean the publisher, without our names. It was manuscript A, manuscript B. The publisher calls me in and says, you know, I know this is your life, but this part doesn't sound realistic. What?
Right.
The way you described your mom coming across the border, it doesn't sound credible. What are you doing to me? This is my life. Okay, calm down. Calm down. The dialogue, it sounds like something out of a Hallmark movie. What? Why are you doing this? Do you see? So basically what he's telling me is you're not a writer.
Yeah.
And then they look at the German woman's version, right? The fictional account. And suddenly hers is realistic. The dialogue is realistic. Everything sounds real. And she made it up. And I wrote it, but I don't have that part of the storyteller, right? And I forgot my point about this was, but certainly yes, it's just you storyteller can do it, and just because I have this experience and I want to show it, it's valid, yes, but as a novel, it's not going to work. As a memoir, it's not going to work because it doesn't sound credible. But it's my life story, but it doesn't sound believable because the way you wrote it sounds really made up.
Yeah.
So yeah, call my lawyer.
And that's when you start getting into the pockets, because then there'll be pockets of people that want that authentic voice, as opposed to somebody writing it at a voice that the majority of the people can sort of understand or resonates on a bigger scale. But yeah, that's when you get into those pockets.
Yeah, and we live in a very specific time right now where there's all these extra sensitivities that didn't exist 20 years ago. And hopefully that will iron out a bit over time. But who knows? So many things have happened that I did not expect 40 years ago.
It's always been there. It's always, you know, I often think about this, especially, again, like I don't want to harp on this kind of thing, but this idea of, because I've always been interested in stuff that's kind of well off the beaten path. There's always been this very conservative view about a lot of things, you know, like when it comes to music or writing or movies or whatever it is, like, so it feels like it's always been there. It's just now this perspective that I have now where I guess part of me feels that people of my generation and maybe a bit younger, give or take a half a decade or so, are going to be coming from a similar place where it's like, no, we went through all this kind of hyper censorship of rock music, that it was all the devil's music, and if you played it backwards, blah blah blah, all of those things where there was this hard censorship on things. It just feels like it's weird that it's happening now, because you feel like there should be another generation that's like, no, we're strongly against that kind of thinking. But I think there's always going to be this conservative voice, whether they call themselves liberals or whether they call themselves conservatives is another conversation. In my mind, they're all fucking conservatives, because what do you mean I can't read a comic?
They have much more in common than they think. They have much more in common than they think.
Yeah. And I think that that's always going to be a part of kind of that mainstream voice that's really against anything that's outside of what they deem as acceptable. It's just what that group has deemed not accessible, exceptional, or I guess accepting, has changed a little bit from decade to decade.
I mean,
well, the most notable thing would be Huckleberry Finn, which was banned by the racists and then banned by the anti-racists.
That's right. But there's a deep humanity in the context of that book, the friendship between these two young kids, one black and one white. And
the language was authentic to what was going on at the time.
The language, but also the friendship of these two was very radical at that time.
Yes, it was very radical.
It was very radical at this time. And so I'm sure people were offended by that, you know? And that's why, and so, Neil Gaiman I didn't know was an issue, that the way apparently he felt he had to apologize because of how he portrayed some gay and lesbian people in some of the early issues of Sandman. And I was stunned by this. I had never heard this before. And I thought, why did he apologize for it? Because I mean, when Sandman was coming out in the early 90s, on a mainstream comic, I mean, you guys know this, you didn't see gay and lesbian characters have prominent roles in a DC Marvel book like this. You didn't.
Right.
And I mean, Love and Rockets did it, but it was an indie book, and very few people read Love and Rockets. And so, and even and then if you see the letters page, and in the letters pages to Sandman and the singles, there's one from the Texas Human Rights Commission, which is based in Austin, and it's LGBT advocacy group. They wrote a letter in support of what Gaiman was doing in the Sandman. And because of the positive aspects of it. This was when, at the time, some comic shops and some people were offended because he was portraying gay people in a positive light.
Right.
And so, because I've seen some YouTubers comment on this, and I just have to hold myself back and just not lose it. I'm going, really? I mean, the Republicans in the late 80s found a wedge issue with family values, which was really, really get the gays, no sex outside of marriage. So any politician who had an affair, you're a target, right? Marriage, all this type of thing. That was code for that. We all understood that. And if you had any kind of, you were not going to get elected statewide, even if you're local, because it was going to be used against you. And so Gaiman was doing, he didn't have an agenda. That's just the way his imagination worked. And he did these stories. And so, like Huckleberry Finn, I mean, really? That book was really radical at the time. These two men who were friends, regardless of the language that was used. There's a deep humanity to that book of Twain and to all Twain's work, right? And same with Gaiman.
Yeah. I mean, the beauty with Gaiman is he's around now to combat this stuff. Because I was saying this afternoon, I follow his Twitter account, and he often, well, maybe not often, but a number of times he's posted, he directly confronts people who want to talk some kind of nonsense about his work and his portrayal of people, whether that's one extreme or the other. He often confronts them on their values and talking about, like, listen, this is what this book always was. This wasn't me changing a book. You've clearly never read my books if you don't understand why the characters in the show are portrayed the way they are, right? So, which is great, having that active, someone who wants to confront and wants to kind of engage which is also something that we don't see. And I understand where that comes from, this not wanting to engage for fear of whatever it is you're fearful of. So it's nice to see someone that's kind of willing to engage with people on that level and call them out on sometimes what is, quite frankly, just a bunch of bullshit, right? So hello for the love of comics, by the way. Thank you very much. This stuff has less to do with principles and more to do with the power over others, says Russ Works. Sorry, Damien, go ahead.
No. Russ makes a good point. I mean, there's shifting power over time, and people they can't resist using their power when they happen to have it.
Yeah, totally.
But I have to say, with my daughter and the way she's been sensitized to stuff, it's very hard to explain to her that in the context of 40 years ago, something was actually pro-gay that she now thinks is anti-gay.
Right, right.
It's just eventually, like I say, I hope eventually that kind of stuff irons out, but the context changes. But then there are, as Russ is saying, people who are just use that to their advantage. They like to flex their muscles,
right,
on either side of the political spectrum.
Totally. And I think some of that comes in this case, like modern times now, it comes from a place of, I mean, you know, I grew up working in welding shops and factories and things like that, and warehouses. So you're constantly bombarded with a certain personality type, let's say. So you start hearing a lot of kind of the rhetoric, and you just start getting to a point where you just, you know what? I don't want to hear it anymore. I just don't want to hear it. I understand that perspective's out there. I'm sick of hearing, you know, like whatever it is. I went in between working in film a couple of years. Well, actually, when Lily was born, I went and worked in Saskatchewan, and I worked in the fracking industry where we built the holding tanks. And I the first day out in this little town in Saskatchewan, I'd come wearing one of my fuchsia shirts, and automatically the first thing from the guys was, "Oh, look at this faggot." You know what I mean? Like, and it was a good reminder of like, okay, this is the world. But it's one of those things that you just start getting sick of hearing that world's voice all the time when it's the only one you seem to hear, where I can totally see that reaction of like, you know what? We just don't want to hear it at all anymore. It's all done. You can never say anything ever again. It's just unfortunate that leads down this other path. Even though I understand where it's coming from, you just get tired of hearing the same nonsense from everybody that you come in contact with. I just don't want to hear it anymore, period. Right. You know, so, but that's, I think, where that self-censoring of and curating your experience online comes in handy, right? That having that ability to do that.
I bet there's a feeling of power, going back to what Russ says, in making people censor themselves without
that's the dangerous
telling
part
them
for
to,
an artist
but pressuring them.
Yeah, that's the dangerous part for an artist now is, I mean, back to Neil Gaiman a long time ago said that when he started to write, he was having trouble because he kept worrying too much about what a reader would think about him. Would they think this is too strange? Would they think I'm odd? And it wasn't until he met somebody and this person told him, no, don't do that. Just write the story. The audience will find you. Don't worry about that. Now, this would have been, I guess, in the 80s. But I think at this point, because sometimes I imagine, okay, let's say I started to write something. And now it would creep in. Not that I'm worried that what they're going to think about me, but I'm already thinking, oh, this sentence could be misconstrued. Or this could be saying that I'm anti this. Or this could be, well, what am I doing? That already breaks your concentration. It completely whatever story you had in mind is not going to go in that direction. And it's probably not going to be as good. I mean, if Shakespeare was worried about writing about Othello, a man who was maybe Arab or black, and he stopped himself as an Englishman, we would never have Othello. Or I'm going to write about teenage kids who commit suicide, or a Denmark, or a prince who finds out his father was killed by his mother, so he's going to kill all his family. or you just don't. You just, as an artist, that I think the self-censorship at this point is probably the most dangerous thing. Or
Yeah.
dangerous only in the sense of the work you could have done, but you didn't because you were so worried of what's going to happen with Twitter, or what's going to happen
Right.
with the publisher when they send it back to you, or the filmmaker says, well, we can't do this because of this. And so then what do you do? So,
Well, and that's thankful that we now have such a strong, independent kind of platform and kind of pathway for people. I mean, you can
yeah, you do.
you
Yeah, you have
can
the platform.
self-release your own music. You can start a little production company and do your own films and have a distribution in that way that's not kind of banking on kind of theater exposure. There's streaming platforms, online platforms. I think that's one of the bonuses, because I agree with you that self-censorship can absolutely kill you if you're thinking to that degree over and analyzing every sentence. You're now not speaking with your authentic voice, and it's not something that I personally want to read. I want to read somebody reading with their authentic voice, right? So it's kind of nice, that shifting of, at least there's outlets for some of these individuals to kind of create something in whatever kind of scene they decide to, right? Because there's other options as opposed to just one option: mainstream movies or mainstream comics or whatever it is, mainstream music. You have so many options open to you, and you said it very succinctly, and I think it ties in with what we talked about earlier with the channels. The audience will find you. You put out stuff that you are genuine about and want to discuss. That audience, even if it's 50 people, is going to find you. You know what I mean? And I think that's what's also so beautiful about kind of our kind of corner of the YouTube world, that the audience finds us. They always do, and if they enjoy it, they stick around. And if not, we don't hear from them again, that's fine as well, right?
And
Well,
you inspire other people to be genuine, I think.
Yeah.
But Terrence, you make music, right? You make music,
Yep.
electronic music, right? But let's say at one point you listen to some ballads from the 40s from Mexico, and you like those ballads, and you find something in them and you start to incorporate them into your music.
Yeah.
Do you think 20 years ago, would this have cropped into your head that you're appropriating something? 20 years ago, would that have come up?
Absolutely
No.
not.
Now,
No. Yeah.
might it come up in the back of your head, even though you wanted to use it? Or let's say, Damien, you've written stuff before. You write a science fiction story about, let's say, Hernan Cortés never went beyond Cuba and went and met Montezuma and Tenochtitlan. If that never had happened, and you just had to use a science fiction story where the gods and the Aztec gods basically take over, and you write a story about Aztec, like 20 years ago, would have crept into your head, should I be writing this story? No, of course not. But now might it come in? And that's when the self-censorship begins.
Well, just what Sean is saying there below would be in my head. So years ago, when I wrote a lot of fiction, I became aware a lot of science fiction, because I wrote science fiction, a lot of science fiction always had male protagonists. And so I put about half of my protagonists were female. And I found that to be very useful to me as a writer, too. I mean, I was glad that was pointed out to me. But now I think I might say I'm appropriating female experiences, and I shouldn't do that. And I certainly might hesitate before I write about a Mexican American's experience.
Well, you see,
so
that's concerning
it definitely, the self-censorship, and particularly conversations with my daughter, who somehow, I'm not sure what they tell her at school, but she's constantly worried about cultural appropriation. Like, that is such a huge buzzword for her. It's almost overwhelming.
I mean, I agree.
Right.
It's true that in the past, people didn't have maybe the opportunity to write their voices. Now they do. However, if you want to write a story, but if you want to write a story about the Mexican experience, it would never enter my head that you're appropriating anything. Absolutely not.
Right.
And if Terrence wants to use music, of ranchero music and his stuff, if it's good music, that's the way it works. And if you want to get to Mexican music, I mean, what did they borrow? They borrowed from the Arabs. Why? Because when the Spanish came, all that guitar stuff, they got that from the Arabs. right? And if you listen to a lot of
Right.
ranchero music, it sounds the flamenco music. It sounds a lot like the Spanish music, and the Spanish music sounds a lot like the Arab because of all those cultural influences here.
Mhm.
So that's just it,
Right.
So I agree that in the past, those voices maybe we were restricted, maybe not restricted, but there was less of us given the opportunity for that. But one, we have the opportunity to, but two, that shouldn't stop any one of three of you here from doing that. And if someone were to accuse you, yes, but does it sound real to you? Let me take out
Yeah.
my last name. Again, the example that I use, I write my life story. I give it to a publisher. A German woman writes a fictional novel about us. Hers is credible. Mine sounds made up and bad literature. Go with hers because that is truth. And that's going to do more credit to my people, quote unquote, my people, than my narrative, which does not sound convincing and is crap. That's going
Right.
to do more disservice to
Right.
us than this because art has its own internal function, irregardless.
As long as that editor has good judgment and isn't
Right.
just picking
Totally.
someone who speaks to their prejudices rather
Right.
than
But that's where the
speaking
good editor
with a
comes in,
new
right?
voice
Good
that they
editor,
are
right?
not
That's
used to.
Yeah, that's a whole other matter, though. A good
But
editor is a good editor, right?
culturally, we need the intermixing of different groups. One of my favorite things is I forgot the name of the kind of music. I forgot if it's rumba. Is that from Cuba originally?
Roomba. I don't know where that's from.
Anyway, it
Might be
it
Cuban.
comes from a melding of African rhythms
Mhm.
and some other musical influences from European countries,
Mhm.
presumably Spain, I would think. And then rumba came back to Africa, to the Congo.
Virus.
Rumba came back to the Congo, and the musicians there loved it, and they made up a new kind of music where they were trying to do rumba, but it turned into something called soukous. And I love soukous, but without the Spanish culture taking the African culture and then the African culture taking it back, we wouldn't get this new form of African music that I really love. So, I mean, I think that happens in everything creatively. So, ultimately, the people who worry about cultural appropriation are in a problematic situation because you can't progress without it.
I think one of the things, just to kind of along the same line, just responding to Sean's comment, I just want to make sure that, like, when talking about this myself, I'm not neglecting any of that stuff. I think that all of what you're talking about is equally important. I think that we're also just talking about art and expression in general. And I think I sometimes also think about what you were talking about, Gore. My son listens to a lot of kind of newer hip hop, or what he calls cloud rap and things, and stuff that he's played me. It's now, whereas kind of the version of hip hop that I love, like the Mad Libs and the J Dillas and things, like, they're drawing from a very specific area and genre. What's really interesting to me about the stuff that my son is playing me is that they now have all of those records plus another 40 years of music that's gone to like industrial shoegaze or whatever kind of genre you can tell. So now they're drawing from a more enormous palette, and that's culturally as well, from across the world, because some of these guys, they're sampling online, so they're not going digging for records. They're just looking online and experiencing things. So you do get that cross-pollination, which is ultimately going to move art ahead. But in none of this conversation do I mean to imply, or I don't think any of us mean to imply, that there's another issue alongside all of this, that there's a group of people that aren't being given the benefit and not being given the opportunity, maybe is a better word, to participate in art, whether that's writing, whether that's painting, whether that's music. They're not getting an opportunity like everybody else is within those genres. And I think that that's a separate thing, though.
Yes,
I don't
it
think
is
that
separate.
that's kind of tied in with what we're
Separate.
talking about.
Completely
Yeah.
separate. Separate.
Welcome back, Chris.
Thank you.
I mean,
We're going into
my name
way
is,
too deep waters here.
Yeah,
well,
we're going.
I use Gore Vidal, right? I mean, what do I have in common with a WASP gay man from a political family? None. I'm straight, American, Mexican descent. And yet his novels, his essays, Myra Breckinridge, the very controversial Myra Breckinridge, City and the Pillar, a bestseller at the time, one of the first to deal with openly gay men in a novel. But his stories resonate with me because they speak truth about us, about humanity, and it works, right? And Vidal wrote about everybody. I mean, he just wrote, but then he's that generation of all the writers who wrote about everybody. And his good friend was Carlos Fuentes. They're same generation, and the Carlos is the other one, that I have. They're both very important writers to me. Now, Carlos happens to be Mexican, right? But that's not the reason I read him. The Hernandez brothers happened to write when Love and Rockets was coming out. I didn't like it because there was Mexican Americans in that comic. I just found Hopi and Maggie fascinating. The stories were just incredibly good. They said the word Chicano. Locally, the word Chicano, you heard it, and you heard it in a comic. But I didn't go, oh, wow, this comic's about me. No, I live in Texas. Texans are very different than people from California. That area there is a particular region in California, that neighborhood, right? I didn't know girls like Hopi. I didn't know girls like Maggie. But it sounded true how it was written, and the experiences sounded true. And I like the artwork. I like the stories. And when you read those stories, those characters in there could be Republicans, could be Democrats, could be any political stripe the way they talk, because it sounds so real to you, right? And that again, and so they just wrote these things. And Chaim is a straight guy, but he wrote credible women. Terry Moore, straight guy, he writes credible women. One's bisexual, one's a lesbian, Strangers in Paradise. And of course, it's risky. Does it sound credible? It sounds good. If it doesn't, like Damien said, a good editor, or if you don't have that, the audience will tell you this sounds completely false. We're not going to buy this crap. And you shouldn't be writing this. And then you can get into the issue. You're a white male, straight, writing about these two women. You shouldn't be doing that. Then maybe you can use that argument, right? But even then, the thing is, no, you're just not a good writer. And but the Hernandez brothers, that's not the reason I like them, because I saw myself in them. Absolutely not. I mean, what did I see in American Flag? What did I see in John Sable Freelance? Books that I loved as much as I like those, right? And
but you're possessed, and that's what you saw in Constantine, though, right? That one.
Yeah, that's covered Hellblazer. We Hellblazer. John and I, we go way back, right? Yeah, I read all 300 issues of Vertigo. Yeah. What do I have in common with that guy?
Yeah.
He didn't date younger women.
Chris, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts, if you've been listening along, but please.
No, I just popped in on this one. I think where I first encountered cultural appropriation, and I didn't realize it, at the moment, was more like, and I guess now it's obvious, but at the time it wasn't. Maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, I don't know. Was like you'd see, white kids partying for Cinco de Mayo and wearing sombreros and stuff like that, right? And that's more, and maybe that's way more blunt, and I think it is today. My Mexican friends are like my age or older, and they make fun of that. They're completely okay with a white person wearing a sombrero. They make
down here either.
Yeah, they make cultural appropriation jokes. Well, it might be for a Mexican American that's 21 or 22 now, but that's where I first seen it. And then obviously you've seen like white rappers when they get famous, they'll be called culture vultures or something like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you see it here and there. I think that like for our society, it's a new way to think, like it's a relatively new thing, or at least for white people it is, or white males. And I think sometimes that we might overthink where we are in the moment when it's really takes society like a few years to like really fall into place. Because sometimes it only takes one person on Twitter to go like, that white person shouldn't be writing a black person, right? And I'm not sure that the whole world necessarily thinks that. I think that the idea is more like, hey, we should maybe have more black writers writing Black Panther, just because that's the most famous, black superhero, and that we want to make sure he's represented well. And maybe it's not always, if today, right now, if like a white writer started writing them, like people would probably speak out about it, right? But it's really like sort of finding its place, like where it sits, especially now that we're getting this opportunity in society, which is overall a good thing. I think Sean said that earlier, which is overall a good thing, right? That that people are getting more representative, that you're getting more women writers, that you're getting more black writers, and that we're happy to see a black writers representing Miles Morales, or we're seeing it more that someone's not like representing him right or something like that, but I guess my point is, though, too, is that I think sometimes we think too much in the moment, and we have to sort of like, you have to sort of like, maybe us, right, understand both sides, that it's really like feeling itself out, like where it's going to sit in society, and it doesn't make that decision right away. It takes a few years. But yeah,
no,
right. Over time. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, just that I agree with, but also don't prematurely discredit someone from doing something because it's not their.
Agreed.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Basically,
and then
once the product is out and you read it or you watch it, my reaction has never been, it's bad because a white man wrote this.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
No, I never said. I say no, it's bad because you're not a writer. You're not a good filmmaker. Find something else. I mean, one of the best films about Texas was done by a Jewish man from up east, John Sayles, Lone Star. That one got Texas right, because again, he understood us. How, I do not know. I know he traveled a lot in Texas, but even then, he got it right. The dialogue, the people, the setting. He's not from here. He's
people
from
like that Texas. People like that Texas blood, and neither creators from West Texas.
So
yeah,
and he got it right, And if he got that right, would have been criticism. Well, you're a Jewish white guy from up east. Of course, you got it wrong. No, you got it wrong because maybe you're not a good screenplay writer about these things. You shouldn't write historical stuff. Go write something else. Because it is dangerous when you go that route. You started criticizing someone that they got it wrong because of their sex or gender. Because easily, I write a story about a Canadian, a guy who lives in Vegas, a guy who lives in Portland, and I write about you all, and suddenly, wait a minute, why are you writing about them? Or people, them? Is that your background? Well, let me finish first. Let me see if it works, right? And if it doesn't work, it's not because I'm an American of Mexican descent. It's just I should find something else to do. It's like when Paul Bowles, writer that I like a lot, he made Gertrude Stein in Paris. He wanted to be a poet. That's what he wanted to do. He gave his poetry to Stein. Stein says, "You're a horrible poet. Try fiction instead." And became a first-rate short storyteller and a composer as well. Because he composed the music for the Vast Menagerie and the early Tennessee Williams things. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, and so, yes, you're right. Give people the opportunity for their voices, but don't prematurely discredit someone because they're not a whatever.
In a macro sense, that's what we're falling into. Sometimes we look too closely at that detail.
Yeah.
And then people are going to be wrong about it, right? Or they're just going to jump to conclusions, right? But in a more macro sense, that's what's sort of falling into place, like representation versus, hey, don't like shit on the guy because he's writing, he's Terry Moore and writing women, Terry Moore couldn't do Strangers in Paradise today for sure, Like, you know, it exists and is respected only because it was done in the 90s. But today it'd probably be, you know, it'd probably be over criticized or.
He's a
Yeah.
Houston boy. He's a Houstonian.
Yeah.
Damien,
Well, maybe
you were
he
gonna say
couldn't do it
something, yeah.
now, but maybe he could do it in 20 years from now.
Yeah. Or he could do it now and
we're
just
like
not.
in a period of imbalance,
Yeah.
making up from a previous period of a different kind of imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully the balance will be restored. But it does seem like, and then it seems like the temporary imbalance is a convenient way to get people angry and riled up.
Yeah.
Twitter helps.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you have to make your whole argument in 280 characters.
Right.
So we get Comics Gate in part feeds off of anger at seeming injustice against the people who used to have all the power.
I don't know how many times I've heard people that where I live here, not just in the comic shop, people that I know who don't read comics, who don't watch some of these shows, but I think on their Facebook page or whatever their phone has, they'll say something that's like Comicsgate related. They'll say something, well, you know, there's a black person in this thing. Well, you know why it's why. I mean, and they'll say verbatim, absolutely verbatim, what I saw on one of these political shows. It's like it's almost verbatim. I mean, right now people are upset at She-Hulk locally. They're upset at that. They're upset at this new
the twerking scene.
Twerk thing, you know. And I'm thinking, well, if they read the comic, there was a whole episode of John Byrne do her jumping rope. You know, practically. I mean, but
you haven't heard the rebuttal to that, Gore. I've heard the rebuttal to that.
What's the rebuttal?
I don't know. I don't want to repeat it.
And but
is the rebuttal part important?
Oh,
No.
I get it. Okay, yeah. Sorry.
No, I didn't say that. That's Damien's joke. That was not. Normally, I do go down that
but
road.
But it serves a political end, and it's created a great deal of resentments towards Black people, LGBT. So far, Asians and Hispanics are not on target because they don't see many of us over here.
Yeah.
And so not yet, right? But eventually, right now, politically it serves an interest, and because many of these Comicsgate channels are really political channels, and
right?
You're destroying my childhood. And they'll say, we're not being racist. We're not being this. But, and then the whole chat's all racist, right? But the person on the show, he or she's pretty good about not, saying.
No, they've learned how to walk the line.
Yeah.
When you go to the chat.
To do that. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, there's the same thing with the right-wing channels. And the left wing has its own problems too, obviously. But yeah, you got to go to the comment section. You know what I mean? They're stoking. That person's just stoking the fire. You go to the comment section and it's a completely different world. And you said that about Mexican Americans, by the way. I watched when that book Gogor was out. I don't know if you guys remember that book.
Which book?
But the main character, it was by, I forget the name of he's a artist and writer, Gogor, Gor. And he did another sort of popular book. But it's a fantasy book, but the main character has a Hispanic last name. And I just happened to be watching a Comicsgate channel, and he was like reviewing the book, of course. And, obviously that catches his eye, that the kid's name is.
I never even noticed that.
Yeah. The kid's name has a Hispanic last name. He goes, oh, I guess Mexicans are in this fantasy world, right? But I mean, what does it's a fantasy world, right? Like, why does his name have to be like Sir Arthur Doyle or something, it's a fantasy world. But so, I just always remember that he had to point that out, in that context. There's no reason, but it's just because the truth is, though, and there's this great book on how good people can be Republican and Democrat. It's a great book. It's a little out of date now, but the truth is that psychologically, and it's not a bad thing, right? There's just a situation where a change affects you more. Do you know what I mean? And the truth is that I noticed it too, to be honest. I didn't care, but I noticed that the kid's name was Hispanic in that book. and I just kept reading, right? It was like, to me, it was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Fantasy book, who cares, right? But to someone else that's very used to, you know, fantasy being very British and maybe German based, right? That's what fantasy is, mostly British based, right? That it does look really weird to them, you know, and it causes a reaction, you know. And then that's a lot of this stuff that we see, like, culturally, when I, you know, when I see people get mad or get angry about it, it's really that, you know, it's really the change, and that the change is happening too fast, you know. And for all of us, I'm sure all of us are pretty liberal and happy that trans people are happy and stuff like that. But I mean, a lot of that took me by surprise too. And I'm the youngest one here, so I can imagine you guys, you know, and not that you're against it or anything, but I'm just saying, like, suddenly I had to memorize. And I'm in Vegas. I've seen trans people my whole life, or my whole adult life here, right? But, you know, it is, you know, suddenly I have to, like, start using pronouns correctly, right? Which to me was a surprise 5-6 years ago. And you can imagine how someone psychologically like that's a lot more resistant to change, or built into their psychology, would, like, fight that, you know. So,
but also not being exposed to those things. There's a couple of thoughts that I have about a couple of things, like, I'm having trouble keeping it focused, so I'm just going to blurt it all out. Sorry if it's all over the place.
Yeah,
but
I did it just now.
Things that you talked about there, I think part of that is super 150% absolutely correct, that it's this exposure to it and these things. And I feel like, as much as I noticed it, again, because it often feels like stuff that's kind of this underground eventually makes it to above ground. So I think of people like Wendy/Walter Carlos. I think of people like Genesis Peorage. I think of people like Vaughn Baudet, about that kind of, the way that even back when they were kind of creating art, they were talking about this gender fluidity and not identifying as a specific gender or changing genders. So I feel like there was some exposure to that already within these kind of nooks and crannies that always exist, that sort of end up. And I often wonder about, like, even modern day, I would love to, and if you want to get to know where a culture is going to become, like where it's going to end up, dig into the underground, dig into those little nooks and crannies, and talk about some of those ideas that are happening there. You're going to eventually see that those people that are highly affected by that getting and having a bigger voice and starting to bring some of those ideas forward. I mean, as challenging as some of those ideas are now, I think of somebody like, obviously, Genesis Peorage is a very strong personality, so I don't think that it affected them very much as it did somebody now. But there is this idea of what you're pushing against at the time. And then it's also one of the things you said, Chris, and this isn't about you, it's just the statement I've heard a million times, that you couldn't do X book now. I always kind of call bullshit on that kind of thing. You could always do those books now. It's just, who is that going to appeal to, and how big is that audience going to be? Again, I mean,
it would sell less.
Totally, it might sell less. But I also question that, though. I wonder if that's the case, if it really will. And then just the third point, again, because it's rattling around in there, this idea of kind of these voices, again, going back to who's writing the stories. While I absolutely agree with this idea, a good writer is a good writer. If it's a white 50-year-old man writing to an audience that's a white 50-year-old man, and they're in the voice of a 20-year-old woman, I don't care how good of a writer they are, it's still not going to have some of that kind of legitimacy, because it's now them filtering maybe their existence through this character talking to somebody that's had a same existence as that writer. So again, not saying that we're talking about this whatsoever, but that idea of, yes, good writing is good writing, but I think it just needs to be really underlined in bold, that there's also that real importance of hearing those legitimate voices and hearing from those people who are living that experience. And that should never be kind of as good of or bad of a writer as you are. If it's a legitimate voice, I can deal with something, again, like especially going through these 80s comics, there's still some fantastic voices, but man, their fucking language is all over the place. Like, the drawings might be shit, the storytelling techniques aren't right there, but there's still something within that voice that's like, this is coming from a legitimate place for this person. they don't have the language or the chops to pull it off to the level that maybe we're sort of used to in some areas, but that voice is coming through loud and clear, and I understand what they're saying. You know, it's something different than I'm used to. So yeah, those are my thoughts rattling around there.
So let me throw this out based on what you said. So I got more introduced to Guy Caldwell. Actually had his art book, but because of yours and Colin's conversation a while back, a few months back. And Guy Caldwell's, you know, writing Black people, right, in the 70s.
Right.
And one of the people I follow on Instagram is a Black teacher.
Right.
You know, and every day he puts on, you know, he does like a short reel, you know, of a Black creator, right? And that's exactly what he should be doing, right? He's just making sure that everyone knows, you know, even there's a bunch of people that I've not known about that he's put on there, you know what I mean? But he saw me show a Guy Caldwell book, the Guy Caldwell book I have, right? So when you know, and he's a smart guy. I'm not saying he's not going to get it or call me a racist or anything like that, right? But like, that's a book, you know, based on what you said right now, you know what I mean? That's a book that is a white guy in the 70s writing, you know, writing not only about Black culture, right, but about, you know, the inner city that includes Black people, you know what I mean? So how do you place that based on what you said? And it's good. So it falls into what Gore says, right? Is it good? Is it good? Does he get it? Does he get it? Right.
Honestly, I think one of the things that I would say directly to that is the issue that I bought a page from. That issue specifically, whatever issue it is, issue 4, I think, that not only talks about kind of this Black experience, but it talks about an inner city and poverty experience. It talks about, like, because in that building that they're a part of, there isn't just Black characters. Yes, there absolutely is some main characters that are Black, but there's also Spanish characters, and there's also white people. It's more about, for me, something like that is, while the voice is for sure, I think, that language of the time, and again, maybe coming from very direct experience that he has with Black people and kind of that experience that he's had. But I think there's a bigger thing he's talking about. It's about the poverty of a particular part of town that just so happens to be dominated potentially by a certain group of people, but also a mixture. So I feel like he's not necessarily talking from the voice of a Black guy. It's more a class thing. Yeah.
It's
like a poverty
thing.
And surroundings. Some of his other books, though, 100%. But I mean, that's often what I think about, right? Like, I do keep that in mind when I'm reading a creator who's a white guy. One of the things that's interesting about Caldwell, though, is there was apparently, when he was coming out, people were convinced that he was a Black writer, a Black cartoonist. They were convinced. And again, like, I don't know which group was convinced, whether it was a bunch of white intellectuals talking about, their stoners talking about this shit, thinking that it was a Black guy talking about it. But so I don't know those details, but I do feel like that's one of those moments where that's just good art. Like, that's just quality art, that he's been able to kind of portray this other voice and maybe blur the lines as to, who cares what I look like? You know what I mean? I just have this story. So, but it's a valid question for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it still fits with I think it actually fits with both what you and Gore say, though. Like, even though he might get it right at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's still a white, at the time he was young, right? A white hippie's perspective on that. It's more the whole class, but a piece of that class is African Americans in wherever it was, you know, New York or whatever it's supposed to be, you know, the inner city.
Yeah.
Right. But you know, but it still falls into what you said, though. Today now there are a ton of African Americans that can actually tell their own story too, you know, where maybe it wasn't as easy to do it in that mid 70s.
Well, I mean, what's one of the infamous voices from back then? Iceberg Slim, right? Like, wasn't his stories? They were, you know, as a Black, I believe, pimp or, you know, in that kind of world, right? That authentic voice. You still had those authentic voices then too. It's just this idea of, as we progress and as we kind of, you know, here in Canada, especially with kind of our borders open to everybody and anybody, we're getting, even in Winnipeg, we are so culturally diverse in Winnipeg. I don't know how that sits across Canada or anything, but it really feels like there's so many more opportunities for those voices to come forward that maybe there just wasn't. You know, part of it was it just wasn't kind of part of the norm or whatever. It wasn't part of those cities and landscapes where it's completely changed these days. So there's more opportunity, which is always a good thing. Yeah. I guess I'm sort of speaking in circles, but sorry for missing the chat there. I know that For the Love of Comics has been having some great conversation here, but I've sort of been focused on the screen, which is different than sometimes when I'm just talking to myself.
For the Love of Comics input too would be great also, because that's another thing too, like, and I think Gore was even sort of saying this. I'm sorry, Gore, I'll let you talk in a minute. I'm sorry to take over, but it's also important so it's always been a white male's version of it, right? But it's also important, like, people see into your culture, right? So for example, For the Love of Comics, you know, has a bead on American culture, has come and lived here and worked, you know, with his family that lives here and stuff like that. So it's also important to get that other outside perspective on your culture is also important. I think that one of the imbalances was that it was always a white male doing it. But
one of the most popular writers here in Texas was Larry McMurtry. I think he's better known for Lonesome Dove, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the 80s and 90s, I knew more women who read McMurtry than men. And all of them said he knows how to write women. And they just felt that he just understood them in his books, no matter, even if they took place like Lonesome Dove in the 1800s, or take place in Houston, River Oaks, in River Oaks, and I think like in terms of endearment was one of them. So Larry got it. You know, he got it right. Straight guy whose son was a wonderful musician in YU in Austin. And so again, it's just, if it sounds real, I mean, Jane Austen, right? Very credible man. And maybe men from the 18th century, I suppose, but upper class people. But Jane got it. I'm not going to read Jane because I'm not going to stop reading the Bronte girls because no, they got men right.
Mm-hmm.
Again, give people the voices, the opportunity. I agree with that. But again, don't prejudge something. I think Chris's point was you couldn't write a book now. I think what you're getting at, Chris, is you do that, but get ready for the pushback, which is going to be hard
that is
social media. Well, in the past, there'll be a few letters being sent, or maybe an editorial in the New York Review of Books. Because there was, I think Damien may remember this, the controversy with William Styron's book of Nat Turner. And what he wrote this book, I mean, Steiner's in the South, he's also Jewish, and he wrote about the Nat Turner Rebellion. And there was some controversy over that in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was articles like the New York Review of Books, people debating back and forth. But in the end, it ended up winning an award, the National Book Award, and the bestseller, well-regarded book, right, overall. Now, let's say with new William Styron, same story. Want a publisher, they think, do we want to deal with this issue here? We're going to get a lot of pushback here. And then the author himself, I want to write this story. I'm not going to self-censor myself. And the publisher does it. Am I ready for the Twitter storm? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is no, then
nobody's ready.
Yeah. Yes.
Like the Spanish Inquisition. And that's when I go back to Sean's. That's when I go back to Sean's comment of do not use the Twitter platform. Like that's, and I think that's at the crux of a lot of this is that discourse and that ability for people to kind of tell you that your stand-up comedy was a load of horse shit and go fuck yourself. That back and forth is huge now, right? That's something that just wasn't there. And I think that's something that I always get a kick out of when comedians or artists or whatever push back against this reaction. It's like, yeah, well, because you're used to talking to this, where it's like, I've got the microphone and you guys are just there. I'm not used to now you being able to call me on some of the shit that I'm saying while I've got that microphone. And I do feel like some of it is that, like, if you do have a voice and if you do have something to say, my hope is that you're confident in that voice. So all of that pushback, we're all human. It's going to affect us in some degree. Absolutely it will. But hopefully you're healthy enough to understand that. Of course, what I have to say, I love Merzbow. Do I want to play that in shopping malls? It'll drive people fucking mental. You know what I mean? And
No.
they'll hate
Yeah,
it.
definitely.
And that's not that, like, I'm okay with that though. I'm okay that 90% of people are going to think it's a load of garbage. I still like it regardless of what their thoughts are, right? So, and I realize that comes from a certain place, especially if you're creative and putting that stuff out there in the world, that confidence isn't necessarily going to come part of that package, right? So you've got to work on that. But honestly, as much as Twitter and places like that have become the town square, and how important that is to keep that pure, on the other hand, fuck those platforms, fuck that shit. You know what I mean? Like, there's always going to be somebody that's got something negative to say, and they'll be glad to say it really aggressively, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, in the spirit though of that working, I think we're starting to see, like, I hate the term cancel culture, but I think we're starting to see that it doesn't always work. That there could be a Twitter storm, and you could just turn off Twitter.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You know,
yeah.
And like, there's those comedians that you talk about. There's a lot of them that have gotten in trouble for saying this or that. You know, and a few years ago they were afraid. They were like, "Oh, Twitter, we can't become comedians anymore." But now they're starting to notice that, you know, there's been this Twitter, because you can't, you know, people have that much energy to get mad at them all. But they're going, people are starting to notice that they were canceled on Twitter, but they're still selling out rooms.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're still selling out, right?
Yeah.
So there's in that like sort of spirit I was trying to say, where we're trying to find our spot and our place and everything, you know. I think that people are starting to realize that yeah, people could say you're canceled, but you're not really until you are, right? Like, you know, that girl that got fired from Star Wars, the MMA fighter, she has jobs still, you know, and I hate what she said, and I don't want anything to do with her, right? But she found jobs still, you know, so.
Yeah, it didn't completely end her career. Hell, Louis C.K. even has a podcast, you know what I mean? So it's...
Yeah.
I like Louis C.K. I like his show. His
show was great.
His show was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it a lot of effects. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people came out to his, a lot of people did come out to his defense, and then he was canceled too. So, you know, his was just weird, I think.
It reminds me of this. See, you guys, well, I don't know if Chris remembers this, but I think Damien and Terrence remember this. Let me get it.
Uh-oh. You might get canceled off YouTube. We don't know what he's going to
do. Now, I'll give you guys a hint. It was like 5-6 years ago. 5 or 6 years ago. An artist did a cover. And it was an homage to one of Earl Grey's favorite comics and one of my favorite Alan Moore comics. You remember what comic that was? Well, it was not an homage, but it played on that. You remember
the Batman one?
Remember this?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Remember the controversy over this one?
Mm-hmm.
The comic was never published. I found this at my local shop a few months ago. And I don't know who did the artwork to this thing. It was somebody who took a Detective Comics, right? And they just did and somebody requested this one. And I saw it there. It was not in the dollar bins, but they just gotten it in, and he sold me for $1. But I remember how this thing was. It was one of the earliest Twitter storms that I remember. Was this one?
Yes.
And eventually, what the artists decided, I think he himself decided before DC decided to pull it.
He was the one who decided to pull it.
He was the one who decided, right?
Yeah.
And
when he realized how people were seeing it, he felt bad, or he said he felt bad about it, and pulled it.
And but that was one of the ones where it made me aware of how powerful social media could be to influence someone to. Again, because the artist will say, you know, it's one thing if the company pulled it. No, you hired him. Like you hire Milo Manara to do a Spider-Woman cover, and then you're going to be offended by it? Are you out
Yeah,
of
yeah.
your mind? You
You
stick
should know who
by
you're
him.
hiring. You
Yeah,
should know who
you
you're
stick
hiring.
by him regardless who's offended. You hire Manara, you know, and if people are pissed off, they're pissed off. You publish that damn thing and don't pull it. And it's one thing if the artist wanted to pull it, but I wonder if here the artist pulled it because he was getting so much. Well, he just decided I'm going to pull it. So,
Yeah.
The artist in that case may have pulled it because he honestly didn't think it would trigger rape victims until he was told it was.
yeah, because I remember she didn't get raped in the comic, and people were there was all this
No,
debate.
people believe she did get raped in
Yeah,
the comic.
because they were using the word rape, and I'm thinking that is not the legal definition of rape. What happened in that comic? It was awful what happened to her, but it was not rape.
Well, a
But
lot
you're
of
right,
people
they were
believe
using
that
that to
she was
distinguish
raped off screen,
Yeah,
Mhm.
off panel. And somehow the way he portrayed that in particular made them think of that. But there's a lot of other I don't really know, of course, what the artist really thought.
I don't really think.
Um,
So, but I do remember that was the first major. What made me aware of how powerful this could be. It could affect people themselves, and said, "Okay, I'll stand back."
and you do wonder with those cases, did one person say it and then other people echoed it? And are those actually the rape victims who were talking, or, you know, where did it really come from?
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know.
But anyway, but they didn't pull the Manara cover, did they?
What happened with the Manara one? I don't remember what happened there.
I don't believe it got pulled, but I think it was just,
There
it's
was
one
a
of
lot
those
of
that you
upset
see
about
all the
it.
time. It was the pose, right? People just
Right.
questioned looking back at some of this stuff. And that's where I've had conversations on Twitter too, of this idea of, like you said, Gore, you know who you're hiring, you know what he's going to draw. Like, come on, you know,
Right.
really? You're surprised by this? Come on. And then
But-
it's also
but
this
I think
idea
the criticism was less of Manara and more of the editorial for hiring him on a book
right.
that's interior was supposed to be very women empowering,
Right.
not about women sexualized.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And it also brought up that conversation of sexualizing women in comics and things. Yeah.
right. So it was the wrong comic at the wrong time, I guess,
Mhm.
at least for the critics. But again, the same thing. You never know. Like sometimes I can't remember a particular controversy, but it was something about African Americans, but I was pretty sure the people who brought it up weren't African American, and no one actually asked African Americans what they thought about it. But I just can't remember what the controversy was. But
Right. For the Love of Comics says, I get some questions about India and culture that come straight from Temple of Doom. And people say, hey, that's a fun, great movie. Yeah.
I like Temple of Doom. It was nice and grim. It was dark.
That's a great movie.
well, there's a lot of controversy
I'm
around
still here. I'll be right
Apu.
back. I've got to visit the bathroom.
I know that For the Love of Comics likes The Simpsons, and there's a lot of stuff about Apu, right? There was even a documentary made about how racist
Yeah.
Apu was.
So that's interesting. That documentary is interesting though, because a lot of times people just want to explain. Because I
Right.
think in that documentary, he didn't want to necessarily cancel Apu.
Right.
I might be wrong about that. I might be wrong
No,
about
I think
that.
you're
but
right. I think the call to cancel Apu came not from the documentary, but as a
Yeah.
result of it.
But he goes, I had to live my life like answering questions about the Quickie Mart because Indian immigrants here happened, it happened to be very popular among them to work on their own and open their own stores, right? In the 80s and 90s, really, But I mean, I could see how that would affect like an Indian American, like a first generation or second generation person having to like respond to that all the time because honestly, the Simpsons are just successful, right? And it's not even about Apu, but I could definitely see how that would be. And I'm sure there are examples, for Mexican Americans and blacks too. But Apu is like the one example.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's context with bad racial stereotypes. If you are in a group that is abused where you live, then a racial stereotype about you is going to be much more painful than a racial stereotype about an Irish cop, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, because as an Irish American, which I guess I was raised to think I was, I never was abused by some other group because I was Irish American, except for arguments with the Protestants on the bus about who would go to hell. I never suffered over being an Irish American.
Did you tell him you're also Jewish? That would have thrown him.
At the time, I never thought about myself being half Jewish. I always thought of myself as Irish Catholic. It was only later that it occurred to me, wait a minute, there's something else going on here.
But one thing regarding to that point is when Trump announced his candidacy, and he's used the phrase about Mexican being rapists.
Yes.
The reason so many Americans of Mexican descent or Mexican American supported Trump, he had a lot of support down here.
Yeah.
There was various reasons, but one of them was when he was talking about Mexicans, they felt he wasn't talking about us. He was talking about the Mexicans from across the border.
Yeah.
And there's a key difference between the Mexican Americans. I think Chris knows this quite well, living in Vegas, and maybe you guys, you live as well. But I think it's more resonates with us because of close proximity to the border. Is the assimilation of the Mexican Americans. Yeah, you may use Spanish words here and there. You may be second generation or whatever. But there's a clear distinction between Mexicans and Mexican Americans. I'm generalizing here, but growing up, I remember Mexicans that I knew looked down on Mexican Americans. Not just because they didn't speak Spanish, but because their manners were cruder. They didn't dress as nice, even if they were poor. They were not as culturally literate, even though they came from, again, they didn't have any money or whatever, compared to the Mexicans. And among the Mexican Americans, they resented that. They absolutely resented that about Mexicans. So when Trump said all Mexicans are all these things, they're like, yeah, that's right. He's not talking about me.
Yeah, he's talking about those guys.
That's
Them.
right. That's right. And so that's why he carried, Texas. He carried, well, Republicans are going to carry Texas anyway. But that to this day, so many of them that I know, they focused on the economy, the idea that he was the chauvinism. They like the nationalism aspect about America. Yeah, whatever. That resonates as much with them as with a guy who's European American or white from Georgia or wherever, or from Pennsylvania or wherever.
It's interesting that
they all listen to the same music, the same country artists, the same. They both like the same films. They both get the same fast food joints, the same thinking, and so I think it would resonate the same way if someone says this guy's an Irish whatever. Well, those are the Irish over there, not the Irish here. We're Americans first, that sort of thing, and that's why I wasn't surprised by that. I was not surprised by that, and because I live in this area. But so his comment when I said that, and it was on the media, says that's it, he's done. There's no way he's going to get the nomination. I said, don't be so sure about that.
That's why he got it. When he said that is why he got it.
That's right.
It's interesting you said that though about because there is a distinction. So when I grew up in LA, the gangs were, there were two sets of Mexican gangs. There were black people, and then there was me. But when my parents divorced and we moved up to Central California, where there was no black people at all, the gangs were literally the ranchero Mexicans that worked in the fields and the Mexican Americans that listened to hip hop. Those were the gangs in Fresno. And those who fought, and they knew exactly who they were. To each other, they were completely different. A completely different thread, completely different culture. So. But when you said that, the two and the way that one looks at the other, it made me immediately think of that. So.
But as a white liberal, knowing my conservative relatives, I figured they interpreted that including all Mexican Americans.
That's true. That's also
Yeah.
plays in. That's right. I don't disagree
So
with
I
that.
had the reverse reaction of, oh, this is like the beginning of, some roundup
discredit
anybody
that.
with
No, not at all.
Mexican blood or something.
You know. Mhm.
I'm not causing a buzzing, am I? Is there a buzzing?
No buzzing on my end.
Not
It was
on my
probably
end.
me on mine. It was in a thing that was vibrating. Sean, thank you very much for hanging out and contributing. We really appreciate it. You had some great things to say in the comments there.
Bye, Sean. Mm-mm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I couldn't ask for a better 10-year video. I tell you what, like seriously, guys, that was absolutely incredible. And I love you guys. It's great that you decided to jump on. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you,
Um,
Terrence. Thank you for having
Yeah,
us on.
it's great. And this is again like this is the kind of thing, right? Like as much as it's nice to just talk about the books and separate all of that stuff from the books and things, I think it's really I don't know, it's really enriching and engrossing to have these kind of conversations as well in kind of like a healthier kind of way, right? Because I mean, oftentimes with the discourse online, it's really just comes down to yelling back and forth and things. So I really
nice
appreciate
to have
you
it in a
guys kind of
healthier kind of. Really nice to have
Yeah.
it in a healthier kind of way.
yeah, and just being very articulate about it, I think is also incredible. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. I'm gonna have to call it. I do have to get to
Yeah.
bed. But
Yeah.
this was fantastic.
Thank you for
honestly.
lasting 10 years.
Yeah. Thank you,
Yeah, yeah.
Terrence. I'm glad
And
you're
I'm gonna call you
I'm
guys
so
racists
glad
on
Gore
Twitter.
and you have both
Yeah.
stuck through all the ups and downs of YouTube and are still here.
a lot of
Yeah,
drama.
totally.
I'd feel very
Another
lonely without you.
potentially 10 years, maybe. We'll see.
That
Yeah.
seems like such a long 20 years on YouTube. That would be
Yeah,
insane.
go
You'll
my
have
gosh.
read all of the black and white explosion books by then, though.
Exactly right. There'll be no more. I'll have to find something else.
The
Move into
bodacious
90s.
bonsai beavers will be completely red the entire
Yeah,
run.
that's right. And I will have extracted something important out of humanity from those stories.
And so when you guys are up there, just make sure that when you're at your comic shop, if you see a young woman buying Love and Rockets, I need you to get me the information. I need you to
Okay.
get me everything you need to know. Make up
We'll
a
send her
story.
your Twitter. We'll send her your
And,
Twitter
I'll
handle.
get Twitter. I will get Twitter for this because it's a higher cause. All is fair in love and war, and that transcends ethnicity, gender, culture, whatever. That goes
Yeah.
way back to the caveman.
I'll just say this
we'll
though,
get an
Gore.
army of people around the world searching for this woman.
No,
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's
I'm very
probably
democratic. I'll take one from you, one from
it's
you.
probably Jaime. It's probably Jaime. It was probably Jaime's daughter. To be honest.
That's fine. That's fine. That's all right.
Yeah.
I'm cool. I'm
Right on.
progressive that way.
Thanks, everybody.
guys.
I'm going to push end broadcast.
Right on,
Thanks,
Chris.
everybody, for
Yeah.
watching and chatting.
Chris, Terrence, Damien.